Chair, the meeting is now live. You can proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Huckabee, mute your microphone.
I've muted Councillor Huckabee.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just before we start, I've just got a note for committee members, and it's following on from our discussion regarding ward members' participation in the council meetings. It's just so that you all know this has been deferred and will be going to standards shortly. Thank you. So, right, good afternoon, everybody, and we're going to start the proceedings today slightly differently. So I'm going to ask council committee members to actually do a roll call, and this will be facilitated by our principal clerk.
Thank you, Chair. So in the meeting room with us today, we have councillors William Armitage, Jane Barry, Andrew Cooper, Mark Foster, David Hancock, Carol Huckabee, Mo Potts, Alan Powell, Tracy Reeder, Jackie Ridgway, Kathy Rouse, and yourself, Chair, Diana Ruff.
Thank you. You're all probably aware this is our first and maybe the last time we hold the planning committee using software, and we do now have a protocol in place in the way that this is going to facilitate. So I'm going to ask our principal clerk, who will read out the protocol for the following meeting.
Excuse me, Chair, just before that, would it be helpful to a committee if you had a roll call also of the officers who will be assisting you today?
Just to assist with that, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of
if we start with the
apologies, I think there's a little bit of a delay there. So just to help with identify who the officers are in the meeting room, we have Richard Purcell, who's the head of planning. We have Adrian Kirkham, who is the planning manager. We have Colin Wilson, who is the case officer for this. We have Jim Fields and from legal. There's myself, Nicola Calver, I'm the governance manager. I'll be facilitating the meeting. We have Alan Marr, who's the senior governance officer, who will be clerking. We have Damien Stanton and Amy Bryan, also from the governance team, in the meeting room today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Alan, do you want to facilitate by reading out the way forward?
I think that'll be the facilitator who'll do that, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. So just in regard to for members, in terms of the etiquette that we'll use for today's meeting, if you could please mute your microphones. We may have an issue with feedback, so if we keep all our microphones muted until we're ready to speak, it does help with that. It also can indicate to the chair and the vice chair in the chamber if you wish to speak by turning on your microphone. For public speakers in the meeting today, we're asking you if you can keep your microphones off and your cameras off until called on by the chair. During the debate, the chair will invite members to make themselves known at the commencement of the debate, but if after that point, if members do decide they would like to speak on the application that we are discussing today, please either unmute your microphone to indicate they wish to speak, or you can use the chat bar to write speak in. If the chair or vice chair don't see you, I will try my best to flag that up to the chair. In terms of voting today, we'll use a mixture of methods. On the regular agenda items, it will be a raise of hand that the chair and vice chair will be able to see from the chamber. For the applications, it will be done by recorded vote, although it won't be recorded as such in the minutes. If you do have any tech problems during the meeting, everybody should have my phone number or Martin's phone number. Please give me a call or use the chat function and write tech support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll start. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
None have been received, Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move on then to no apologies. Declaration of interest.
Again, none have been received, Chair.
Thank you. This is to approve the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Has all the members had a chance to look at them, read them, and is there a mover?
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Councillor Armitage, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Thank you. All those in favour, can I have a show of hands? Whatever. Can't we see?
We can't see.
No. No.
Chair, all the members have raised their hands.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chair.
Right. Thank you. Item 4 is a report for the planning applications. Slightly different for this, and this is the main part of our business. So item 4 is a consideration of the planning applications, and as you can each see, the individual applicants has its own report and are set out in items 4A and 4B. I'm happy with this and intend to use it as our running order. However, before we consider the first of these, I would like the clerk to explain how the individual applications will be dealt with.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can members hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the 2 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda, although, as you've said, there will be a break between them. The Chair will introduce the application. She will then ask the planning officers to explain to members any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplements have been published on the Council's website, and the link has been sent to committee members. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation. This will set out the application plans and photographs from the site. The screen showing this presentation will be shared with those attending the meeting. They can also be seen on the Council's website through its YouTube channel. Following on from this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views using the conferencing facility. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions. The purpose of these questions will be to clarify any points that have been made. When we have heard from all speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee and determination by a vote. A note for speakers: once the application you have come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the virtual meeting. If you choose to remain, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You will not be allowed to participate further in the meeting from that point. Now, as you're aware, this meeting is being live streamed. The Council will make a recording of the meeting for purposes of preparing the minutes. Once the minutes have been approved by the committee, then this recording will be deleted. But please note that others may record the live stream of the meeting from the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll move on to the first application, and this is NED/19/00786/FL, the Cartledge Hall Farm at Holmesfield. This is in line with our normal practice. I'm going to ask our planning officer to tell us about any late comment reports that's been produced, and for the planning manager to give us a brief presentation showing photos and plans of the site. The meeting facilitator will show the presentations on this screen. This means I might find it difficult to see everybody. Therefore, I will allow the officer to complete his presentation and ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end. There will be plenty of time for you to ask questions finished.
Thank you, Chair. Just
Adrian
in terms,
Kirkham?
thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the updates and presentations, Colin, the case officer, is present in the meeting, Chair, but as this is the first virtual meeting, I'll take the lead. But there may be some point of clarification I'll need to speak to Colin about, in which case I will identify that and ask your permission to do so. And also, Chair, Nikki's kindly going to share the presentation with you, but first of all, I've got some late updates and an introduction to the application to give to members. So I'll do that first. Firstly, Chair, in addition to the late representations that members received yesterday, we've had a further 6 representations late yesterday and overnight on the application from various residents of Cartledge Lane at Holmesfield, Far Lane at Barlow, and Main Road at Holmesfield, making the following points, stating that the development is overdevelopment in their opinion, an eyesore, out of character and not in keeping with the natural beauty of the area, but will adversely impact on the landscape, spoil views, demolish local wildlife, and be generally unsympathetic to the conservation area. Those points, Chair, as officers, we believe have been addressed in the report already, so I don't intend to comment further on those. In addition, Chair, I've got comments received from Councillor Angelique Foster, and she asks, first of all, that the application is postponed as she has been informed that residents have not had enough notice to comment, and no notice has been placed in the local parish paper, which is the usual way, Chair. Just firstly, on that point, as officers, we believe that the application having been received at the end of summer last year and advertised in the normal way has had plenty of opportunity, provided plenty of opportunity for those who wish to comment to make comment on the application, Chair. And as you'll have seen, many have done so. So officers don't see any reason for further deferral of the application today. In addition, Chair, Councillor Foster also expresses her concern about the application as County Councillor, considers that the development is inappropriate in its scale within the Greenbelt, and also that the development would have a detrimental impact on openness, with access to the development presenting an issue due to poor visibility onto Cartledge Lane, with the cumulative impact of the increase in traffic being negative overall. And we'll have to see some pictures of that shortly, Chair. Just in introduction, members will recall that the application was deferred at committee in March, and it's represented now to committee for consideration and determination, although it is unaltered as the applicant did not wish to amend the scheme further to members' consideration in March. The application, Chair, proposes the demolition of a number of structures, the conversion of 1 to a dwelling, the construction of 4 new build dwellings, and the retention and conversion of other traditional buildings to be used ancillary to the new residential units. The site, Chair, is primarily located in the Greenbelt, where it's accepted that new build dwellings are generally inappropriate, whereas the conversion of existing buildings is generally considered acceptable. However, Chair, one caveat to that is that development of brownfield sites, as here, may be acceptable if the new development would not have a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt than the existing development. Officers have concluded, Chair, and as set out in the report, that while spatially the proposed development would not have a greater impact on the Greenbelt, visually it would, resulting in an officer view that the proposal is, in that context, inappropriate development. However, Chair, for the reasons set out in the report, officers consider that the overall benefits of the scheme, the removal of the inappropriate buildings and the retention and refurbishment of others, represents the very special circumstances in this case to justify approving the scheme. Just remind members, Chair, that they will need to pay special regard to the site's location within the conservation area. For the reasons set out in the officer report, Chair has concluded the impact of the development is offset by the wider benefits, as I've already mentioned. Officers, Chair, have already weighed the technical matters and concluded in review of the site's extant use, the limited level of development proposed, there would be no unacceptable impact on highway safety. In conclusion, Chair, there are no technical reasons to resist the application, so it is recommended accordingly that permission is granted. And if Nikki's able to help, Chair, I'll just run through the slides that most members, I'm sure, will recall from March, but we'll just run through them again. Thanks, Nick. If you just go down to the 3rd slide, please. Thank you. And we'll have seen yesterday, Chair, and when we went through the virtual site visit that we undertook, the site occupies a site at the southern end of Holmesfield. And as I say, most of the site lies within the green belt. And you'll just be able to see on the site, as you can see it there, at the very southerly end, there's a bungalow, and then a Dutch barn. And also to the bottom end of the site, there's a variety of buildings that we'll see on the photographs in a second that are in association with the extant livery use on the site, but are currently generally unkempt. And then the buildings further north into the site proper and towards Holmesfield are those that are generally of greater character and support the conservation area aims and objectives generally. Just move on, Nikki, please. So this is the site outlined in red, Chair, and as I say, it's just to the south of Holmesfield, and you'll just be able to make out Cartledge Lane going north from the site to join the main highway network. If you just move on again, Nikki, please. The next one, please. Thank you. This shows the site as it is proposed to be developed, and you'll be able to see at the bottom left of the red line site, and there are 4 dwellings. That's where the 4 dwellings would be placed. Red circles, and they relate to 3 small trees that we removed to facilitate the development, and they'll be a good indicator when we come to look at the photographs in a second. Site would be the retention known as the threshing barn. The buildings that are to the south of there would be removed, and that would form the other dwelling. And then the other 4 buildings on the site would be renovated and returned to a use, and they would support the residential uses on the site. Just move on, Nikki, please. Just go on to the next one as well, you will. Thank you. This shows the buildings in red that would be removed and leave the site, with those that are left outlined being the remainder. So the bottom left corner is the existing bungalow that you'll see on the photographs in a second, and the ancillary building. Behind that, the large red building is the Dutch barn that will be removed. The large grouping of buildings to the bottom right are those that are associated with the threshing barn currently. They too would be removed, as would 3 smaller buildings to the north of the threshing barn, with the others being retained. Thanks, Nikki. This is the northern and eastern elevation of the threshing barn, showing how the existing openings are going to be reused to have windows and doors placed in them to support the residential use. Next one, Nikki, please. Thank you. And then this is the southern elevation, which is the top of that shot. And then the western elevation, which is the lower drawing, again showing how the existing openings will be used in that barn to permit its conversion to a dwelling house. Thanks, Nikki. We come on now to the 4 new build dwellings. Just in the right hand corner, you can see the red square oblong rectangle that denotes where these buildings would be. This building would be located. This is a pair of semi-detached units. And again, Nikki, we come on to that's the roof plan of the semi-detached units. Thanks, Nikki. And then we come on to the elevations of the detached units that are proposed. Move it on again, Nikki, please. And that's fine. That's the red blob in the top right. That's one of the detached units. I don't know if the other detached unit is next on the list, but it's similar in design to that one. I might have to move it on again, another one, please. The other detached unit is similar in design to the one that we've just seen, but there are 2 montages here. The one on the left is a photograph of what the site looks in its existing form. The one on the right showing what it would look like, and you can just make out in the middle of the photo on the right, the semi-detached units that are proposed. Let's move on to the next one there, Nikki, please. This shows the site from the southern edge of the site. You can see on the left-hand side, you just make out the very edge of the bungalow with the ancillary building next door. And those are the 3 trees that I've mentioned earlier on, which would be removed. And behind there is the Dutch barn, and they would be replaced with one of the detached units that you can see on the photograph on the right. And to the right of there is one of the retained ancillary buildings, the building on the furthest right, the converted threshing barn as it would look. And as you can see, the southern elevation utilising the existing openings. I think, Nicky, we move on to some photographs now. Thank you. This is a photograph, in effect, taking from the other 180 degrees from the montage we've just seen. So this looks south. To the right is the line of the footpath that then descends into the Millthorpe Valley. You can just make out the existing riding arena on the left. And this is just the view towards the Millthorpe Valley. And as you can see, the site just fall away to that valley beyond the edge of the site down to the valley bottom, then the hills further beyond. Thanks, Nikki. This is taken from the same location as the one we've just seen, but in exactly the other direction. You can see here on the left the bungalow that would be demolished, and you have the shed which would also be demolished. The trees that I've made reference to behind which is the Dutch barn, which would also be demolished. And then the 3 buildings on the right are buildings of some character that would be retained and refurbished, with the one to the furthest right being the threshing barn. You can just make out in front of there the buildings that have been erected to support the previous uses, which would be also demolished, facilitating its conversion. Maybe a closer up one of those next, I think, Nikki. Thank you. Yes, that shows the buildings that would be removed, which are currently on site supporting the previous extant use, which would be demolished and taken away as part of any approval granted. Thank you. Should go into the heart of the site now. Yes, this is a close-up picture. The Dutch barn is the building on the left, and then the other 2 buildings will be retained and refurbished. Thank you, Nikki. And sweeping around to the threshing barn there, 2 buildings on the left are 2 of the buildings that will be retained. Thank you. This is taken now from the location and looking back towards Holmesfield of the proposed semi-detached units. There's an existing dwelling there that is on the access drive to the right immediately as you enter the site. This would be an area of garden to serve those semi-detached units. Now we swing around, Nikki, just gradually coming round to the east. And then further to the east, next one, please. Looking back then towards those buildings there would be retained, with the one in the furthest right, the threshing barn. And then if you come around again, there's a close-up one of the Dutch barn. And if you just move on again, please. And again. This is looking back along what would become the access road into the site. So the access into the dwelling houses would just be beyond the building on the left and would go in there to access the 4 houses on the left-hand side. Building directly on the right would be retained, but then the wall that you can just see beyond it with the window in would be removed. Thank you, Nikki. Just looking back towards the threshing barn, again, you can see the openings in the existing building, which will be utilised to facilitate its conversion. And where the cursor is just at the moment, that is part of the building that would be removed. Thanks, Nikki. And this is looking back towards those buildings we just discussed. So the building on the left will be retained, the building on the right, you can see will be retained, and you just see the threshing barn beyond there. So this is the access that would facilitate access to those 5 new units. And we should turn around, Nick, and go back towards the, this is looking back towards the site. The building on the left, immediate left, would be retained. You can just make out the Dutch barn in the middle, top of the shot. And then the 2 semi-detached units would be this side of there. Thanks, Nikki. This is the access into the site on the right-hand side. And that's a shot that we saw on the site visit yesterday. That's Carthage Lane as it goes into the bridle track that leads down towards Barlow. Thanks, Nikki. This is the existing made road that joins the site to Carthage Lane. On the right-hand side is the listed structures that I've mentioned. Thank you. We should then take some shots up here of the access. This is looking towards Holmesfield in the so-called critical direction. And then the final one, Nikki, should be in the other direction, showing the non-critical direction. So that's looking left out of the access road that adjoins to the site, and then onto the highway network, which is Carthage Lane, which you can just see on the right there. I think that's all, Nikki. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Adrian at this point in time from members? No, okay. We'll move on then to the first speaker for this application, and I believe it's the ward member, Councillor Carol Huckleby. Carol, if you can unmute.
Councillor Huckleby, can you hear us?
Yes, we can now.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Carthage Lane Hall Farm. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
You're 3 minutes.
Okay. Carthage Hall Farm is on the edge of the Carthage Conservation Area, and as such should preserve and enhance the area, using materials in keeping with the adjacent stone buildings, not using metal cladding, which is on 2 of the houses that are going up, which is inappropriate with the history of the old agricultural area. There's insufficient parking on site and would not allow adequate overflow parking for visitors or delivery vans. The solution to the problem of Footpath 26, at the moment, it's got to be addressed, because at the moment it follows the track straight through the farm, causing potential hazards to both walkers and delivery vans and horses. These proposals would result in a detrimental impact on the conservation area in visual terms. Adjacent properties are served by large vehicles and agricultural tractors. The lane is not wide enough to allow any adequate vans or anything to pass one another. The parish council raised concerns about the number of objections to the proposal on the basis that there is need for development, but it needs but it needs to be keeping with the area. Access to the site from the lane and it's a difficult junction, which continues to have problems with speeding motorists negotiating the bend to Millthorpe Lane, which has incidentally been knocked down twice in the last 2 months. Carthage Lane comes to an end just at the entrance of the site, and also to the entrance to Brynwood Gate bridle path. This old farm is not suitable for modern housing, which would change the character and of the surrounding buildings and countryside. On the surrounding buildings and everywhere in there is very difficult to go through the site. The area from the main entrance is only a track. And when you think of all these cars, extra cars that will be going through, also with tractor. Right. Well, at 30 seconds, I have had a letter here from Luke Lee Rowley, which I've asked advice. And in his committee takes a step back. If the committee, yourselves, takes a step back, it is clear that this application, in its size and bulk, proposed replacement, impacts on the green belt impact on the conservation area, location and approach does not align with either the spirit of the framework rules or these important issues.
About 3 minutes.
Can I carry on? Based on
Thank
that,
you.
oh, am I finished? Okay.
Any questions for Councillor Huckleby? Remember there to be clarification. No? Okay. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Michael Dawson. Mr. Dawson?
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
And yes. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Dawson.
Can you hear me now?
You can, yes.
Yes, you're starting.
The first thing and most important thing. Oh, sorry. The first thing and most important thing that I want to state is that this proposed application is an inappropriate overdevelopment of a conservation site. This is an inappropriate overdevelopment of a greenbelt area. This site is within the Sheffield Greenbelt, and the National Planning Policy Framework states very clearly, quote, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The buildings that are now there are not special circumstances and are not needed to be saved to allow a mini housing estate to be built. We are then concerned about the weight being applied in the conclusions, which has led to a recommended conditional approval, particularly around the repeated assertions of officers that in this application will somehow save existing buildings. This is a flawed framing of this application, and as local residents, we would ask that the committee disregard this assertion, for which no proof is offered in making their final determination. The size, bulk and height of each of these new designs will have a negative impact on the beautiful countryside. They do not blend into the greenbelt area, but actually stand out as an eyesore and a blight on the landscape. They will be a visual intrusion of this conservation and greenbelt area. Officers have conceded in the summary that the openness of the greenbelt is not preserved by this application, and sizable buildings which are relatively conspicuous are being proposed. The officers also accept there will be harm to the local area from a visual perspective. That is contrary to the NPPF and to local NEDDC policies. Also, the access road is not suitable for more traffic, especially with the farm traffic. It is narrow, and the junction where Cartilage Lane and Millthorpe Lane meet is an awful junction where car drivers can't see both ways unless they pull well into the road. Increased traffic will increase the likelihood of accidents. If the committee takes a step back, it is clear that this application, in its size, bulk, proposed replacement, impact on the green belt, impact on the conservation area, location and approach does not align with either the spirit of the framework rules on these important issues. Based on that alone and disregarding any substantive, I can't say it. Anyway, it should be rejected. The application, the buildings don't need saving, and the application should be rejected. Thank you.
3 minutes, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Dawson? Right, moving on to our next speaker, Ashley Turner.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear.
Yes, you can, Ashley.
Yes.
Good. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, you've got 3 minutes.
Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Committee, I'm speaking not only for myself and my wife, but also from those listed below who asked to be to give their support. A key issue surrounding this planning application is that it was sensibly deferred at the committee meeting on the 10th of March for further review and amendment, but there has been no information whatsoever published regarding any amended proposal, and due to lockdown, the matter has been sidelined. The first related communication in the public domain was dated and posted on 18th of June. This was a notice from Richard Purcell, Head of Planning, advising that the application was to be on the agenda of this meeting today. By the time the mail was opened on the 22nd of June, this allowed just 8 days preparation. Then by email on the 23rd of June, we were informed that the application had been recommended for approval, conditional but no detail. This development has very, very serious applications. It violates green belt and is subject to conservation area compliance. Such a limited period of time allocated for interested and affected parties to catch up and consider what has transpired behind closed doors since the 10th of March is blatantly undemocratic and unacceptable. As far as I can discern, the short time available, the developer has not taken the opportunity to resolve the major issues that have been flagged. Since submitting this submission in advance of today's meeting, I've received a copy of the supplementary agenda containing 16 objections. The case officer's comments on every single one are exactly the same. Officers consider that the relevant matters raised have been covered in the officer report. This looks like a complete whitewash, and they certainly haven't covered to local satisfaction. The CPRE has expressed serious concern that recent changes in the planning system introduced as a result of COVID-19 could be abused in the short term or allowed to undermine community-led planning. Hopefully this will not be the case. I have an immense commitment to Cartledge Hamlet. My wife, family, née Jolly, have lived in the Caudle Valley since the 16th century. I've lived at Cartledge Hall, grade 2 star, for 40 years. I've sympathetically restored Cartledge Grange, grade 2, perpetuating active farming, Cartledge Grange Farm, and renovated the dormer bungalow across the road at 66 Cartledge Lane. Other residents have restored the old stone semi-detached cottages adjacent to the Cartledge Hall farm. Everything has been done to preserve, protect, enhance the historic value of the hamlet, maintaining its remarkable historic buildings and rural culture.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No. If we move on to the next speaker, Mr. Greetham.
Can you hear me, Mother? Can you hear me?
Very.
Sorry?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good.
Yes, we can. You've got 3.
Yeah. First of all, I should like to say that it's repeatedly on these objections that no notices seem to have appeared at Cartledge. So I don't know if that's quite legal. I don't know. I'm not au fait with the planning. I'm really speaking. I'm chairman of the Homestead Footpaths and Bridleways Society. The society was formed about 45 years ago and has been very active over many years. We liaise with the Parish Council, also with the Rights of Way Department at Maslow. The planning application in question is bisected by a very busy footpath in our parish. Consequently, from the health and safety point of view, it will be a major hazard, especially in the construction phase, which will be prolonged as it is probably the largest development in the parish for many years. Furthermore, on the health and safety issue, the junction of Cartledge Lane cul-de-sac with Millthorpe Lane is another major hazard, with at least 2 accidents there, to my knowledge, in the last few years. Our committee, that's the Footpath Committee, believes it will be foolhardy to approve this application. So I plead on behalf of our society, the people of Holmesfield and many others who walk this footpath, to turn down this application. We have to bear in mind, especially in the summer months, this footpath is used by families with young children. Heaven forbid if an accident should happen. The planners would have this on their conscience for years to come. So please, please don't approve this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Reader? Councillor Reader, turn your microphone back on.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to ask the gentleman, in the report, it does say that the applicant is going to seek to divert the footpath. Does he consider that this would address the issue that he's having?
Well, the footpath at the moment is an anomaly because the old maps seem to show that the footpath goes through the barn, the threshing barn, and it's not been determined where the footpath is. So until that's sorted out, I think they should put the planning application on hold anyway. And I don't know, we don't know where the footpath would finish up, whether it's going to stay as it is or going to be diverted lower down onto the Brynwood Gate bridleway. This should have been sorted before the meeting, really.
Any further questions? Thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker, and Maureen Greenland. Hello.
Dr. Greenland, would you like to unmute your microphone? Would you like to try that again, Dr. Greenland? Dr. Greenland, you're still muted. Chair, would you like to move on to the next speaker and come back to Dr. Greenland at the end?
Yes, that's fine. If we move on to Barbara Wood. Hello.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, Barbara Wood.
Hello.
Hello.
It's 3 minutes from. Hello.
Okay. I'm a resident of Cartledge Lane. I've viewed the plan of these new properties and the renovation of the existing farm and outbuildings, and I'm very concerned about the number of new residences replacing one bungalow, resulting in an over-occupancy of the area. The proposal to build large properties with a large proportion of metal cladding does not fit in, nor does it merge into the surrounding vernacular. Presently, there is a metal barn on the land, and this barn has deteriorated over the years and become quite an eyesore. Are the thoughts of the architect and proposer to base the material choices on the ruin of a barn? Let us remember that the proposed planning is for domestic residences and not farm buildings. A majority of the surrounding houses, cottages, and several buildings of local interest at Cartledge Hall are made of beautiful stone. The farm buildings within these plans are also built of stone, some dating back to the 15th century, and all of which are of historical interest to many walkers using the footpath. How can the proposer justify the erection of 4 houses with metal cladding? In addition to all this is the safety of road users and walkers. There are 11 parking spaces designated for these properties with 19 bedrooms. Where would visitors park? Would this result in them parking down Cartledge Lane, where the road is narrow and is a regular access for a farmer with his tractor? As you approach and leave the proposed development area, the junction with the bridle path, which is used regularly by horses and people walking dogs, many off-lead. There will be an increase in traffic down Cartledge Lane towards the dangerous junction with Millthorpe Lane. Many of the residents have to approach the junction on the opposite side of the lane to view the oncoming traffic. May I bring it to your attention that there have been several accidents at this junction. Residents of 62 and 66 have had their roadside walls demolished several times, costing thousands of pounds. Two of the recent accidents have resulted in vehicles being wedged in the stone walls, completely destroying them. Daily, my husband and I have to seriously contemplate getting in and out of our driveway, which is just beyond the blind corner at this junction. And finally, is it not the intention that a conservation area should be enhanced by any new development? I fear this certainly would not add anything, but only take away from the idyllic location of a local beauty spot. And also, we've got to consider the nature in that area, the owl barns and the bats. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you.
Thank you.
Has Maureen Greenland been able to come back?
Dr. Greenland, would you like to try and unmute your microphone again?
Failing that, Chair, do you want me to read Dr. Greenland's text?
Hello.
No?
No, they can't hear me. Alan Mayer is asking if he can read it. Say he can read it. Can you tell him he can read it?
Dr. Greenland, we can hear you. You're live in the meeting.
Oh,
We can hear
good.
you, Dr. Greenland.
Right. Okay, right. I'm ready. Shall I start?
Up you go, 3 minutes.
Shall I start?
Yes, please, 3 minutes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I'm also speaking on behalf of other neighbours who support my opinions, whose names and addresses I've submitted. That's 5 of them. Everybody loves the Cartledge area. Local people, visitors, walkers appreciate the history in the ancient buildings and the tranquil setting of the old farm with beautiful countrysides stretching below it. The proposed plan for a mini suburb of big, ugly modern houses is outrageous. Not only would it spoil the character of the farm and its surroundings, but it would also contravene the principles of the conservation area. There are many serious issues that haven't been addressed. The popular footpath leading through the farm would become a hard surface road with potential dangers for pedestrians and drivers. It would have street lighting. Neighbours have voted against this. Additional lights from the new housing would be seen from near and far. There would be hedges, gravel paths, and all the trappings of suburbia. The plan for the new houses close together with insufficient parking space and no extra provision for visitors and delivery lorries and so on is ridiculous. The approach to the farm is by way of a dangerous junction and narrow roadways. There is no through for road, and so vehicles have to go in and out of the farm on the same narrow route. Traffic on Cartledge Lane would be doubled, creating more road noise, pollution and difficulties with manoeuvring, especially if extra cars were on the road. Natural green space would be reduced, affecting the animals and birds, including barn owls, that frequent their rural environment. 3 years ago, an application for a carport on this same site was proposed, and this committee rejected the scheme on environmental grounds and the planned use of unsympathetic building materials. How can you possibly let this proposal go through? The whole project needs to be rethought. If some kind of development is really necessary, a better use of the existing buildings should be considered, which might not have such a devastating impact. We're asking you to reject this planning application because it's totally inappropriate for this peaceful, settled and much loved area. And I entirely agree with Adrian. Thank you. I entirely agree with Ashley Turner in saying that there has been no time to properly prepare this meeting and contact all the people who have since then contacted and made their comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or clarification, Ms. Greenland? No, thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is the applicant, Matthew Jakes.
Hello.
Chair, I'm sorry, we have Mrs. Foster.
Shall I go for the minute?
Yes, I'm
Hello,
here.
Mr. Jakes.
I'm Julia Foster.
Are you ready for me?
Can you hear me?
I have got her on my.
Can you hear
Mr.
me?
Jakes, if you could just hang fire, thank you.
I will do.
Yes,
You can hear me, Julia Foster?
if you'd like to start, Miss. Yes, if you'd like to start.
Yes, if you can hear me. As a resident of Cartledge for 49 years, I've seen many sympathetic changes, enhancing the area, leaving it a peaceful environment for rural activities. The junction of the main road where Cartledge Lane converges with Millthorpe Lane, culminating in a narrow and difficult approach to the hamlet of Cartledge, to the bridleway, the footpath, farm entrance and residents' driveways. Traffic will be exacerbated and impossible. The proposed housing does not comply to the area of Grade 2 listed buildings and other cottages. Residents voted for no streetlights a few years ago to protect wildlife in a conservation area, also within the green belt. A carport to be built on the property was refused by your planning office. And I request that everyone in the planning office is acquainted and aware of the danger of traffic problems which this proposal will incur. Well, to erect new buildings in a green belt is not acceptable, but to adopt existing ones may be the answer. But even then, for residential use, would be difficult with the one-way approach to the old farmyard. I'm also very aware of the wildlife that will be disrupted. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Foster? Thank you. We can move on now to Matthew Jakes.
Hello. Can I begin?
Hello, thank you for your patience. Yes, please.
My name is Matthew Jakes. I am the applicant at Cartledge Hall Farm. I wanted to make a short statement today to express what I felt was important in the consideration of this application. I carefully chose the design team who worked in collaboration with North East Derbyshire County Council Planning to achieve what I believe is a very considered, high-quality housing scheme, part of which is the renovation and preservation of the threshing barn and ancillary buildings. The development of the scheme has been ongoing for a long period of time as to get the support of all the parties involved and deliver a well-developed design. The viability of the project has been made harder by the intent to deliver such a high-quality scheme with the considerable renovation of valuable buildings in the conservation area. These are to be used as family homes now and for future generations. I could not think of a more perfect place to grow up as a child or retire in old age. This project will be of value and benefit to the community, both in bringing people and families into the area, as well as providing work locally in the building of this scheme. There is an opportunity here to improve the character of this area by allowing us to bring back to life the 17th century threshing barn, stripping away all the 20th century additions that have been added over the years, as well as building contemporary housing which will sit at a juxtaposition to the original group of earlier buildings while retaining the rural feeling through the site layout. I would also like to address the concerns to do with traffic by pointing out that when the livery business was there, there would have been a lot of traffic going up and down there, some of which would have been horse boxes and other agricultural traffic. I thank you for your consideration of this application and hope that you give us the approval we need to move forward with this project.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? No.
Councillor Armitage has indicated he wishes
Councillor
to speak.
Armitage?
And Councillor Powell.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just
William, put
it's on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay, right.
Yes.
This is an amended application, or it was supposed to have been. Could you tell me what's the difference between this application which you put in March and the application today? Because as far as I can see, there's been nothing's been altered at all. Perhaps I'm wrong here. Could you enlighten me, please?
No, you are correct.
But going back to it, we had a lot of fears about various things which were brought up. I mean, whether it was appropriate or not, or the materials used were brought into question. Didn't you think it would have been wise on your part to have amended it slightly?
I think the best person to answer that is Mel, our heritage consultant, that will be speaking after us. And the reason she's here today is to explain that.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Powell?
Councillor Armitage has already mentioned the points that I wanted to make, and I will listen very carefully to what the agent says.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Yeah, can I just ask whether at any point you consulted with the local neighbours and the people that live on Cartledge Lane?
No.
No.
Okay. Any further questions?
Well, I would like to say that there was notice given for them to make their opinion known to the planning through the planning process, and we did work with the planners.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is an agent, Mel Morris.
Apologies, Chair. Councillor David Hancock has indicated his wish to speak.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Hancock.
Sorry, I think we're both on a bit of lag. I dropped out briefly as well. It's just to follow up on Councillor Barry's point. I'm trying to reconcile what Mr. Jakes has just said in terms of not consulting with the neighbours to what he said just a few seconds ago, where he's saying that he's consulted to make this a viable project for everybody. Unless I'm being really thick, those two things just don't tie up at all. So could you clarify to me how you're engaging this to get everyone on side?
I was just pointing out that the planning notices are they're put up for people to put their opinions across, and then we do consider those opinions through the process. So we have taken into account the opinions that they were put forward through the planning process.
With respect to, though, you actually gave the implication in your statement that you proactively sought consultation. That's not proactive, and the statements that we've heard from previous people obviously make it quite clear they feel that they weren't consulted.
Sorry, I'm not sure what to say. If you've misconstrued what I said, then I'm sorry.
Okay. Councillor Barry?
I think what Councillor Hancock's trying to get at is that you could see through the application portal how many objections have come forward. I think what we're trying to bring out is, why did you not feel it important to actually call a meeting of the residents to discuss how you're going to move forward with your plans and whether they could put some valuable input into them?
Closely. Sorry. We worked very closely with a lot of consultants, one being Mel, who's going to speak, and obviously the architect, planning consultant, and the planners for a very long period of time. This has been ongoing for a few years, and this scheme has been revised and revised and revised to get to where we are. I feel that we have made a lot of effort in the design and the thought and the consideration of this scheme to deliver what I feel is, and hopefully everyone involved feels that have been through this process, it is a very good scheme.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Councillor Cooper?
Yes, thank you. You say that, but I have to say that you don't appear either to have listened to the concerns of the members at the council meeting back in March. There's been no amendment, so that feels to me like you've taken no notice of our concerns at that time. And not all members were against this actual application. There were a lot of merits in its actual development. There were many concerns about how it was actually being physically laid out and the materials that were going to be used and some of the sides of the properties that you were actually putting forward. So that's a definite concern for me, that you don't appear to have even taken consideration of the members who were at that committee meeting.
I absolutely did very much consider what was said, and I hope that Mel being here today shows that. And I just think I need to leave it to Mel to try and explain the application.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jakes. We'll move on to the next speaker. It's the agent, Mel Morris.
Good afternoon. Can I just explain?
Good afternoon.
I'm not the agent. I am the heritage consultant, and the agent is the planning consultant.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Hello, I'm a heritage conservation consultant, and I know North East Derbyshire very well, having advised the authority on conservation matters and on contextual design before the authority appointed its own in-house conservation. Hello? Can you hear me? I know
yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. I know the topography, the building materials, and the character of settlement. I managed the Eckington Town Scheme and then the Conservation Area Partnership for several years. My involvement with this site started in November 2018, when I was appointed to advise on both the historic buildings on the site and the layout and location of new development at the beginning of the project. I was also involved in the discussion over the design of the new build element. As with all development where an architect is involved, I do not interfere unless there is a good cause. However, I do at the outset provide parameters, and I identify heritage constraints. The framework for the design is now the National Design Guide, which came out in September 2019. Although the guidance came out in 2019, the same principles of good design were adopted. The two main parameters and constraints for new development, which I identified, were as follows. One, to respect the important views within and of the conservation area and how it is appreciated. And these were accepted by the Planning Authority's Conservation Advisor. And two, to enable the original cluster of historic buildings to stand out as a distinct group, not to ape them or copy their details or create confusion by adding extensions and diluting their character. And these are sound conservation principles accepted by the Conservation Advisor and have
I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Melanie, I think that your audio has dropped out halfway through your speech. Can you hear us now? Chair, I think her audio has disappeared, so she's unable to hear us, and of course she's continuing to read. Is it worthwhile moving on to Alex?
Yeah. Will do. Shall we move on? Okay, if we move on to the next speaker, Alex Zrisky. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Zrisky. Hello. I'm the architect for Cartledge Hall Farm. So the brief for the redevelopment of Cartledge Hall Farm is centred around prolonging the life of the existing threshing barn in historic context through a comprehensive programme of repair, restoration and conversion. The proposals aim to preserve the historical and cultural value of the existing historic context through the sensitive repair and reuse of the existing buildings, which will help to prevent further losses to the historic building fabric. To facilitate this programme of restoration, it is intended to provide new high-quality housing as part of the proposed scheme. So during the design stages, a number of design options were appraised through collaboration with Mel, the heritage consultant, and the local planning authority to address the considerations identified within the heritage impact assessment. So these included the preservation of key views, the retention of the existing footpath network, and retention of the historic group of buildings, including the preservation of the existing footpath that runs through the site. Each proposal was tested and reviewed with the heritage consultant and wider team to assess their appropriateness to the site. The architectural response has evolved by working closely with the heritage consultant to ensure that the historic context forms the centrepiece within the proposed scheme and is the anchor around which the new dwellings are arranged. The proposal is formed of a mix of 4 new 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses which are arranged carefully around a new courtyard that continues this northeast to southwest access defined by the existing threshing barn and historic context. And to reflect the collaborative approach with the heritage consultant and local planning authority, the informal clustered arrangement of the new dwellings is broken up through the scale and massing, which allows the key views to be preserved and the existing footpath to be retained. This has been achieved in part through the design of a contemporary dormer roof structure that has been developed with a low eaves height to provide additional headroom within the internal spaces. So this minimises the sort of proposal's visual impact on the surrounding buildings and landscape setting, and to preserve the key views of the historic context from within and around the site. The new dwellings have also been developed carefully through regular discussions with the heritage consultant and local planning authority, and are formed of a pitched face stonework plinth which grounds the building in a local material that emerges from the local sandstone bedrock. The upper floor levels are designed using contemporary detail and proposed in a grey metal cladding system to reflect the local vernacular found in the surrounding equestrian structures. The historic group of buildings remain clear and distinct. New dwellings have been carefully designed to reflect the key features and characteristics of the historic context. The subtle shades of stonework and metal cladding and warm tones of the timber surround details will establish a clear design rationale that anchors the new proposals to the development site and surrounding historic context that we believe will help the development sit carefully within the historic setting of the site. Thank you.
That's 3 minutes, Chair.
Are there any questions? Councillor Armitage? Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me yet?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Righto.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about the retention of the footpath, which is in there. Can you tell me how you intend to do this when you consider that the footpath at the moment is not on the definite line? And you said about the black metal cladding, that's a feature of the area. Well, can you again tell me how you make out that this is?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So just to sort of approach the first question in terms of the existing footpath. So you're right, as part of the determination process, the sort of presence of the existing footpath that exists on some of the historic maps, you're right, it does run through the existing threshing barn, but the existing footpath that we're looking to retain is the one that's currently on site that walkers use. So we're not looking to disrupt that in any way. That's what we're proposing to retain as part of the new development, appreciating that there's a little bit of confusion and clarification needed on the existing footpath that runs through the threshing barn currently. In terms of the materiality, the approach to the scheme in terms of the new proposals was very much to ensure that the new buildings remain clear and distinct from the historic context. So what we were trying to do with the development of the proposed facades was tap into some of the surrounding equestrian structures in terms of their materiality. So some of that included more of a contemporary detailing, and that includes the metal cladding that you're referring to. And we believe that we can detail that in a really careful and refined way that will allow the existing group of buildings to remain clear and distinct.
Any further questions?
Yeah, if I could just come back to you on that. You say that the metal cladding, as far as I can see, the only really large-scale metal cladding is on the Dutch barn, which are going to demolish. So, I don't think that really stands the test of time, really. Would you agree?
In terms of the Dutch barn, I would. I think the quality of the construction is poor, and I completely agree that the detailing of any proposed metal cladding system would need to be really carefully considered and refined and considered carefully with the local planning authority. Now, one of the benefits of approving an application is that elements could be conditioned, so we would fully expect for the external facade treatment to be conditioned and for us to be expected to work very carefully and submit samples and details to prove that that what we're proposing to those facades is well detailed and carefully considered.
But this is an amended application, and concerns were expressed in March about the use of metal cladding, and you've done nothing, as far as I can see, about anything that concerns were raised at the time. Would you agree that the plan is exactly the same?
We would agree that we haven't amended drawings, and that we would ask that the proposal is considered on the basis of the submitted scheme. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Nikki, has managed to come back?
Councillor David Hancock's just wished that he indicated he'd like to speak.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. It's two actually aspects, because these are the two aspects that concerned us when we last had this conversation in March time. One of them, I mean, the threshing barn is brilliant. It's perfectly in character, and I mean, I couldn't actually say a better job was made of it. But we've kind of got that, and then these other buildings are so out of character with the whole area that was one of the concerns we raised. The other is about the density and the layout of what's there. And I'm conscious that we're going to sit here. I mean, we're kind of like over an hour in, and we're going to have exactly the same debate that we had 3 months ago. And I respect what you're saying, that you're resubmitting it to us, but there are some new members, but on the whole, our opinions aren't going to have changed. We're feeling these buildings are out of character to what is around it, and that the density of the development itself is still too much and not really in keeping with the green belt. So it's all right saying that you're going to change one aspect of it, but the other aspect still is there, and I'm not seeing anything that will mitigate that will make us come to a different conclusion, if the truth is told. So I'm kind of really asking you to help me along here and change my mind from where it was in March.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So if I was just to try and answer your question on the layout, so I appreciate you actually you raising this, because I think it's a really important point of discussion. So there's 2 points really, and I've made quite a lot of notes at the last meeting and also listened to the considerations today, and I think everything that has been discussed is fair, and I can understand your your opinions on it. Firstly, just on the layout, you're really right to raise that, and we ourselves as a team really worked hard and at times wrestled with the layout. What we had to juggle was, in one respect, we would try and create more of a courtyard and facilitate you know, a wider vehicle access into that courtyard and make that more generous. But what that would mean would be that we'd have to push those buildings and the dwellings that run along the southern edge of the site further into the greenbelt, and we didn't want to do that, and it didn't fit as closely with the historic lines across the site. You know, there's a historic axis that runs from the threshing barn along the existing building. So what we tried to do, you're right, and you've identified it, is we've then nudged those the proposed dwellings up in line with the existing building. We've been really keen to try and continue that access across the site. As I said, we had tested it, and absolutely we tested options where we'd push the proposed dwellings further back into the greenbelt, and you know, we're really trying our hardest to try and respect the existing context. So we decided as a team to take the line of the existing threshing barn and building that sits beside it. In terms of the materiality, I've listened to the comments here today, and obviously some of it for me is challenging to hear, and I absolutely take your comments on board. What I can say is that the detailing of that cladding is protected, and it's protected through condition, and we will continue to work really hard to ensure that what would be delivered would be the highest quality possible. I can understand in terms of elevational drawings that you've seen at, you know, possibly 1 to 100, 1 to 200 wouldn't communicate the level of detail that you need to see. But what I would say is that that level of detail can be conditioned, and we can interrogate that much further at a larger scale.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Can I ask a question around the barns that you're going to renovate, not including the threshing barn, but the smaller one? It's down as being ancillary use. Can you tell me and explain what you mean by the ancillary use?
I certainly can. The use would belong to the dwelling. So what we would look to do is to refurbish, repair, and preserve those existing buildings. They would then be able to be occupied then by the dwellings. So, for example, they may be able to be used as a, you know, for anything from storage through to, you know, like a new workshop space or studio. So our intention is very much to preserve them. They're simply titled as ancillary just because they're not given a sort of formal use. But just to clarify, they would be used by the occupants within the dwellings.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Councillor
No,
Jackie
thank you very
Ridgway.
much.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway, Chair, has indicated.
Oh, hello. Yeah, thank you for that. I've been listening very carefully, and I take on board what you said.
Councillor Ridgway?
Yes. I'm unmuted. Hello.
I can hear you.
Councillor Ridgway, I think it's a slight delay from the chamber.
Oh, right. Okay. Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Councillor Ridgway.
Okay, thank you. What I was going to say was that I've listened. You can hear me, Chair. Okay. My concern is about the beautiful trees, the very mature trees that you're going to knock down to build these buildings. I've got grave concerns about that. I mean, what was your thoughts on that? Why couldn't you have made the plans to work round the trees that were already there? Because that's part of, you know, views that people want to see.
Thank you for your question. So I understand the sort of concerns around that. I think in terms of the location of the trees, they were very much in line. They do follow the line of the existing threshing barn. So because we were looking to respond in terms of the massing, to respond to the existing buildings, the existing trees there were what we felt was the most appropriate location for the new dwellings. Now, we absolutely understand that, you know, we're looking to provide as much greenery and soft landscaping as possible. So as part of the proposals, we are looking to provide new trees within the courtyard space.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank
Councillor
you.
Mark
We'll
Foster,
move on
if you'd like
then to... Oh, sorry, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. One question I've got. There's a lot of explanation about restoration and protection and preservation, and a lot of these words centre around the conversion of the existing building. I'm not aware of the history of this application. I'm new to the planning committee, so my question would be: have you given consideration, because it seems like there's two applications in one here, 4 brand new buildings on the green belt, which is one question, and the other one, which is being mixed in with it, is the restoration and the conversion of an existing building. Have you made a consideration to putting 2 separate applications into this, because we've got separate issues here in 2 separate buildings? Thank you.
I think that's a very good question. The reason for the joint application is we've done a lot of work throughout the process of trying to understand the scope of works required to restore these beautiful buildings, and that is a really substantial amount and piece of work that needs to be done, and ultimately it sort of bears a significant financial cost as well to the applicant. So as Matthew's touched on as part of his his sort of statement today, there's a real significant cost that involved in converting a building of the nature of the threshing barn. So what is needed to enable that preservation and conversion of the existing threshing barn is an element of new build to offset those costs. So we've really worked hard to minimise that, and if you was to see the sort of where we started on this journey in terms of what the quantum of development that we had at the pre-app stages, it's reduced significantly, by half. And I think in terms of financial viability, we're very much on the limits in terms of offsetting the cost of conversion versus the new build elements. And we've, as I say, we've worked hard to really minimise that. What the scheme that you're seeing today is an amount of development that we've worked really hard to achieve in terms of how it sits comfortably on the site, responds to the existing buildings, but also provides enough of an offset to be able to fund the work required to the existing buildings. I hope that answers your question. So we can't do one without the other would be the shorter way of saying it.
Yeah, if I can come back on that, I understand the answer, but that's not really for me a consideration when I'm looking at this. These are 2 separate applications for me. To say that you have to build 4 detached buildings on the greenbelt, so you can actually convert this existing building, that doesn't stack up. If you don't have the money to do it, that's to be fair, that's your business. I'm looking at the greenbelt considerations in the papers prepared by our officers, and it speaks in. This is why I brought it up. On the basis of the above policy context, officers are of the view that the conversions of the existing buildings within the application site would be in compliance with the applicable greenbelt policies. So that's one issue, that's for the conversion. I'm sure you're aware of this. And for the others, for the new buildings, on this basis, officers consider that the proposed developments as a whole would fail to preserve the openness of the greenbelt in visual terms, introducing sizable buildings towards the southern edge of the site, etc. And it carries on. So that, we can't mix these 2 things up. Not when it comes to greenbelt policy. If the answer is about how you can afford to fund them, it's for me there's not as much relevance there. It's about these greenbelt considerations. Can you give me another answer which would answer my point with these greenbelt considerations and not to do with how you would fund it yourself? If that's clear.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we've worked really hard to minimise any potential impact on the greenbelt, and that's been achieved in a variety of ways, really. The first thing is in terms of the massing, which I've spoken about already, so I'm not going into too much detail on. But we've really limited how how far south the existing or the proposed dwellings. So what we've done is we've worked really hard to limit the eaves height. So what we've done is we've actually got internally you have a vaulted roof. So you don't have a flat ceiling, you have a vaulted roof. And what that means is that we can lower the eaves height to minimise the effect on the green belt and the effect on some of the key views that I think Mel will be able to pick up on further. So by designing the proposed dwellings in this way, they're much less imposing on the green belt, and their eaves height is much less. What that does mean is that we've had to be very considered in terms of how the spaces are arranged internally. But the outcome is a proposed range of houses that actually take up much less area than what they would had we explored other options. So we've worked really hard to do that, and I think I think internally, aside from a planning perspective, I think internally those spaces would be fantastic and would enjoy spectacular views out across the site.
Councillor
Thank you for your answer.
Yes, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to add on to what Councillor Foster was just saying, just to kind of increase a little bit more to help me a little bit more. So obviously you're talking about impact with regards to the green belt, and we're putting other buildings within that, which would increase the amount of footfall, it would increase the amount of traffic going into that area. Now, obviously, I've listened to the applicant's argument of it, having farm traffic previously, but this would increase residential traffic, including visitors. Would you not consider that also impacts on that green belt and visually impacts on how people will see that area if you're having an increase in residents coming up to that area, an increase in car numbers? And I know that it's talked about within the report about parking and things like that, but however, you will get visitors, and obviously you're going to have walkers passing the area. Would you not consider that will also detract from the openness and the making the area look attractive?
Thank you for your question. I completely understand the considerations that you've highlighted. I think we do have to be really careful in terms of how that's handled and how that is developed through the planning process. I think as Matthew had expressed during his statement, he did. We do have to consider this application in the context of the previous use or its existing use as livery, and I think yes, there will be an increase in car traffic to residential dwellings, but there will be less traffic required and anticipated in terms of the existing business use. So we sort of considered it in terms of its its relative effect, if that makes sense, in terms of the existing business use versus the increase in residential use. But I understand the considerations and concerns, but I think we can work hard to address that carefully.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Sort of moving on a bit to do with the design side. If you look at the policies that North East Derbyshire have, we have BE1, General Design Principles. Can you tell me if you feel truly that this development actually respects the character and appearance of the surrounding area? And does it contribute towards providing a safe and secure local environment? Because it actually states that the only time that we should be getting planning permission in these sorts of sites is if we cover those two off. And I'm just wondering if you can say whether you feel it does or not.
Well, I do, and we've as part of the team, we've sort of tested each other rigorously throughout the process. In terms of the design, to speak openly, you've got what we've done is we've worked hard to make sure that the existing buildings are clear and distinct. Now, it does appear through some of the comments that there may have been a preference for us to do something that is more oriented to the existing buildings. But the challenge that that gives us is that the historic context is then, you know, it does not then remain clear and distinct. And I think our heritage consultant that we're really keen for you to hear from today, you know, raised a lot of strong points that we had to address as part of the design process. So that is absolutely the approach we've taken. And, you know, we feel, as Matthew has said, and I think what Mel will go on to say, is that, you know, we really believe that this is the right thing, and it's been a really thorough process for us. And, you know, it's been a great scheme. I've loved working on this, you know, and enjoyed every minute. And we've had to take a view, and it's been our approach to ensure that the historic context is preserved and that it allows to speak for itself by remaining clear and distinct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nikki, has Mel Morris managed to come back to us?
I believe we do have Mel Morris in the meeting room, Chair. Mel, are you able to turn on your microphone?
Ms. Morris, would you like to carry on from where you were? So,
Oh, I beg your pardon. I don't have my statement in front of me. I've had to move location. Can I have that read out, or the remainder read out? Is that possible? Because I have had to move.
Yeah, I think that's possible, Chair. I think the point which you finished on, just bear with me a second. Where you were talking about the two main parameters, I think at that point, the feed broke. So shall I start from that point?
Yes, please.
Okay, and the text reads, the two main parameters and constraints for the new development which I identified were as follows. One, to respect the important views within and of the conservation area and how it is appreciated. These were accepted by the Planning Authority's Conservation Advisor. And two, to enable the original cluster of historic buildings to stand out as a distinct group, not to ape them or copy their details or create confusion by adding extensions and diluting their character. These are sound conservation principles accepted by the Conservation Advisor and have been carefully observed by the architect. The development aspires to the highest standards of design. There are key areas where the planning consultant and myself have had an input into the design, including the orientation of buildings, the clustering and massing of the development, the proportion of stone to metal cladding, the colour of the cladding, and in brackets, I advised on softer grey so that this would read better than the black against the sky, the use of natural surfacing materials, which the result is a very well considered and thoughtful development which has responded to its local context. Yes, the new development is contemporary, but I believe that it is a good thing. The use of metal cladding is appropriate. It is a material which can already be found on site in the form of a Dutch barn, which is a form of late 19th century traditional farm building, so is appropriate in its context. The scheme should be considered as a whole. It offers exemplary conservation practice, the rescue of a 17th century threshing barn, and it's sensitive to its context. Thank you for your time. That's it, Chair.
thank you. Are you able to take any questions?
Yes, I am.
Obviously not. Oh, right, okay. Are there any questions from any members?
Councillor David Hancock's indicating his wish to
Councillor
speak.
Hancock?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to actually pick up on something that Councillor Foster raised earlier, which you've really touched upon, very well, kind of touched upon in your comments there. They are really two very different things. We're talking about a restoration project and we're talking about a new build. And I'll be completely honest, as I'm going through this, we've got the restoration project is fine and I would approve that without any issue at all. Everything follows through. I'm just not seeing how the extra buildings are tying in with appropriate green development. And the problem with the fact that these two are lumped together means that I really struggle to see how I can fit the policy in approving it. And I know our officers have kind of made one recommendation one way, but nothing that you've said there, the fact that you're making it contemporary, which I respect your views, and I don't doubt anything that you're saying, you're almost making it not fit. And that's the key concern that I have here. And it really isn't everything that you're saying is to try and make it fit the heritage, but it just doesn't.
If I can respond, the scheme, the topography is a challenge. The topography is definitely a challenge, and when we looked at where we could put new development on the site, we are tightly constrained by the landform and by the nature of the relationship with the existing buildings. So we looked at, I think, about half a dozen iterations of the form and the scale and the relationship and the clustering of the housing. And it was decided that it was better to distance it from the farmhouse and better to distance it from the existing group. Now, once you've made these decisions, we're looking at preserving the views. We are looking at essentially it's about architectural style and design, and whether you think it fits or is appropriate in that setting. And I think it is difficult. It's not an easy site, but it is because of the topography that the buildings rise up the slope, and that is perhaps what people are concerned about. My answer is, what we have done everything we can to soften the impact by reducing the scale of the two-story elements. If Alex was to be asked to design something of a lower scale, you would have something which would be much more sprawling in effect. And I thought that the relationship between the semi-detached buildings, which sit alongside each other, but they're fragmented so that they're actually staggered on plan, and the same with the other part of the development. We have broken it up. We have tried to reduce the impact, and we've tried to do that by using the softer materials. I think the effect's going to be the same if it's in a stone, and similar, and perhaps even more impact than the effect we've got now with the metal cladding, because the cladding brings the walls and the roof together. It is perhaps maybe a matter of personal taste, but there are many examples where you have metal cladding on agricultural buildings and on new development in this context. You know, in the whole of Derbyshire, you do find these sorts of stylistic juxtapositions, for want of a better phrase. I hope that answers it a little.
Okay, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. It's following along the same lines that I put to Ashley Turner and other members have brought up. You say at the end of your statement that the scheme should be considered as a whole. And when I put that question about looking at it being two separate applications to Ashley Turner, the answer he gave me was a financial one. I understood the answer. And I'd like to put the same question to you. And if you could answer it, Mel, from a heritage perspective, because obviously that's your area of speciality, why should it then be considered as a whole from a heritage aspect? Thank you.
From a heritage aspect, I look at the totality of what we've got now. And what we have now is a large sprawling development of livery stables, an inappropriate bungalow, a Dutch barn, which, you know, it is an agricultural building, so it doesn't cause me an offence as it is. But looking at all of the quantum of existing modern development, which is a lot of breeze block, large livery sort of area menage, which is quite a scar. All of that is part of the big picture, and this is what I mean by looking at it holistically. We are losing that. We are going to be exposing the flank wall of the threshing barn. You will appreciate that in the scheme as part of how it was always intended to be seen as you approach it from the footpath. So holistically, we're looking at three things. We're looking at the removal of the existing development, which is inappropriate, the new build, and we're looking at the conversion. And altogether, that's what I mean about taking on board everything. You've got to look at the whole picture rather than sort of focus entirely on the new build element. Does that answer your question?
It is an answer to my question. When I consider what you mentioned then, the Dutch barn, the bungalow, and the sprawl of livery buildings, that to me is what I see of Derbyshire and the Greenbelt. That's what I see as a typical view. And that you can see in every small village around North East. So holistically speaking, 4 new metal clad buildings on the Greenbelt, to me, my view is that would be less holistically, it would be less in keeping than a Dutch barn bungalow and a sprawl of livery buildings. That's only my view. But thanks for your answer.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No? Then the next part of the meeting will be to have any questions put to the planning officers. But the one thing I would ask you to do is to just focus on getting clarity from any points that you're not sure about. And then once we've done that,
Chair, apologies, we lost your audio then for a moment. Would you mind just going back?
everyone's happy about the discussion on the application. For that reason, I would ask that if we could actually wait until we move and speak. Say the question planning because of the can we make put forward until the end, had a week and put their views across. Is everyone happy with that? They understand? Councillor yes up.
Sorry, Chair, I think much of that was lost. Would you be able to repeat it again?
Councillor Reid, you need to unmic.
Sorry, Chair, you kept breaking up then. I couldn't hear all of what you said.
Chair.
Sorry, you keep breaking up.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, I didn't hear any of the conversation from the beginning of when you started speaking.
Okay, basically what it was is we're moving on to the question planning. Okay, I'll start from the front, from the top. We're now moving on to where it's questions to the planning officers. Councillor Reader.
Okay, so I just wanted to see.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, Chair, we
now.
can now.
Yeah. So, Chair, just to the planning officers, obviously I just wanted to get some clarification on the issues around traffic and the parking issues. So obviously in the report on page 23, it talks about 2 years ago, a carport was refused planning permission at this same property because of insufficient parking. The development would not have provided adequate off-street parking spaces for up to 5 households. So that was only 2 years ago. Then there was obviously on the same page, highway safety concerns brought up that, you know, it does talk about increased vehicular movement, which would exacerbate an existing problem there. Also moving throughout the whole sheet, it does raise more and more concerns about amended schemes that have failed to address the issues around adequate parking. Highways obviously brought up concerns relating to access and parking arrangements. You move through the whole of the report again for this current application, and there's concerns obviously around the footpath, which I'm a bit concerned that, and I'm still not getting the sense that this has been addressed. And I know Alex was speaking earlier and he said he would be seeking to address this issue, but for determining this today, I'm concerned that not enough has kind of been brought forward in terms of how that is going to be addressed. So for me, I know that officers are saying that they don't feel that the effect of traffic is severe enough to consider that, but actually when you look at the history of this site, and considering that we've had applications in the past refused on these grounds, when you come to it now and you look at the concerns that all the objectors are bringing with regards to very narrow lanes, you've got the ward member also saying that traffic, it will be very difficult, vehicles moving around that site, it would be very difficult for them to go down the lane passing each other. I've listened to everything that everyone has got to say, so I'm just asking officers, can you clarify how that impact has been resolved from 2 years ago when that application was refused because of that to now?
Chair, I think Councillor Reid has made a number of points there. I'm not familiar necessarily with the issue of the carport, although I'm just trying to find that in terms of the history to it. But what I will do, first of all, if I may, Chair, is discuss the basic traffic issue that Councillor Reid has raised. Now, in terms of this application alone, the Highway Authority have not objected to the issue of comings and goings as vehicles. What they raised concern about was the actual on-site width of the access and also the level of car parking, and officers, I'm sure members will have seen, have addressed those issues in terms of how we see them. But fundamentally, the Highway Authority are not saying that the amount of traffic that would use the site would be harmful, and bearing in mind that there is an extant use for both livery and a single dwelling already for the site. What they're saying is there are in-site issues, and what the software believe will result in is actually a management of on-site matters. So those new residents who will occupy the site having to manage their comings and goings if there is conflict, and also sort out the parking if there is a problem on the site. And there is a very small deficiency of what you would normally look for a development of this nature. Just in terms of the general comings and goings, there are 5 new dwellings proposed, notwithstanding the extant use on the site, and the normal rule of thumb is that would result in 6 car movements per day, resulting in 30 over a 24-hour period, of which 15% are normally in the peak, which is around about 5. So you're looking at between 1 movement every 15 to 12 minutes. And as far as officers are concerned, that isn't so significant as it would adversely impact on highway safety. Just in terms of the footpath, if I may, Chair, when we were on site in March, and as we discussed yesterday, the issue of the footpath, currently it runs through the site, and there is a stile, well, 2 stiles and a gate that allow access through the site to the footpath that then goes southwest into the Millthorpe Valley. And so there is a line of a footpath. And as we heard earlier, the current line of the footpath actually goes through one of the historic buildings. So there's clearly an issue there. But again, as far as officers are concerned, there is no reason why the existing right-of-way, whether it be the appropriate and proper right-of-way, couldn't be retained and used and modified going forward. And there is ways of doing that, and Jim could perhaps advise on that issue, Chair. Just going back to the carport issue, I've just managed to find some details, Chair, on that. And that was an application that was considered back in 2017, and the council did take a view. I believe that the impact of the carport was detrimental on highway safety for the reasons that was set out in the decision notice. Members need to take that into account. However, ultimately, they need to judge this application on its merits and whether in terms of the comings and goings of vehicles or highway safety, there is an issue with regards to that. But the matter centred on the carport scale, location, prominent position, rather than one of highway safety in terms of that issue as a whole. So it wasn't in terms of highway safety that carport was refused. It was in terms of impact on conservation area for other planning reasons. I hope that helps, Chair, and assists Councillor Reader.
Thank you. Councillor Barry, then I've got Councillor Armitage and Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, I'm struggling with the results that the officers have come up with, and especially around the fact that you're saying there are very special circumstances in relation to the retention and the repair of the barns. I've gone through all the policies, and I've been reading them through and through. And as far as I can see, I cannot find a reason how we can possibly pass this application. If you look just at H3 in itself, I can find it. That's H3. It states that planning permission will only be granted for housing development outside the defined settlement development limits if the proposal falls with one or more of the following categories. And if you look at B, it says new build development in the countryside, which can be shown to be necessary for the operation of agricultural, which this isn't. The council seeks to negotiate 106. This isn't to do with agriculture, so it's not going to affect that at all. Replacement dwellings, provided the number of dwellings would not be increased and any resulting dwellings would not be materially larger. These are 4 brand new properties. We've got one that's being retained, which is the threshing barn. These are 4 brand new properties, so I'm struggling to see where we fit with that. And again, through the GS 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7, you read through them and where it says whether it should be accepted or not. This application doesn't fall within it. And for me, the renovation of the smaller barns, which are going to be used for ancillary, which could be anything, and it depends on whether the people in the new houses want these ancillary barns, whether they're going to be any use or not. I can't see where the special circumstances are strong enough to say that, oh yeah, we can build 4 brand new houses where the material isn't suitable. You know, it's so the size of the buildings are far too big. On one part, it says about they've got to be of similar size if you're replacing it. Well, these are huge in comparison to the bungalow. So the materials, the size, the quantity of it, and the fact that, you know, eventually there will be light pollution in that area that isn't there existingly, and also the effect that it will have as you walk around that area, because they will stand out like a sore thumb. So I'm not sure how you can overrule those and the policies that we have here in front of us with the special circumstances. So can you tell me how that special circumstance on those barns outweighs the effect it's going to have on the area and the green space and what have you, and being in a what is it? Grade 2
conservation area.
Near a grade 2 building.
That is the note, Chair, that members need to take a view on this afternoon. Just I'll come back to the planning argument, if I may, at the end, but I would ask members to be wary of how much weight they do place on certainly policy H3 and to a lesser extent policy GS2, because at various appeals policy H3 has been deemed by planning inspectors to not be in accordance with the MPPF, and so carry very limited weight. In terms of GS2, it is in general conformity with the MPPF, but it doesn't mirror it entirely. So that's why we've gone to such lengths within the report to discuss the wording of the NPPF, which probably certainly in the case of the principle of development is the primary consideration. However, Chair, fundamentally, officers, I don't believe, have ducked the issue of the proposal within the green belt at all. We've set out very clearly the issues in respect of green belt policy, and as Councillor Foster, amongst others, have said, the conversion of buildings within green belt to, amongst other uses, a residential use would be in conformity with your own policies and also the NPPF. It is the issue of the 4 new dwelling houses, which as officers we conclude and accept is inappropriate development, particularly as there will be a visual impact on the green belt. However, Chair, it is our planning judgment that in this case, because of the benefits that are brought about in terms of the renovation and retention of the buildings of character on the site, in the opinion of officers, that does represent, in this case, the very special circumstances to justify the scheme. Members need to take that into account, but the debate that you've been having this afternoon demonstrates that is a planning judgment which you will need to take a view on. So it's clearly set out in the report, I believe, Chair, why officers have come to the conclusion that we have. Members need to go through the same thought process. Development in the Greenbelt, is it appropriate or inappropriate? I think members from the debate they're having clearly accept that it would normally be inappropriate development. Therefore, to justify it and overcome any harm to the Greenbelt, you need to consider whether there are any very, very special circumstances. And in the report, Chair, we've set out why as officers we believe they are. Members need to take that self-same thought process and consider what their conclusion is. I just would like to mention also, I think Councillor Barry mentioned this, but some of the words you used, Councillor Barry, I lost, I'm afraid, but I think you mentioned this. You do need to also have special regard to the location of the site within the conservation area, and you've heard various speakers talk about that this afternoon. You need to have special regard to that, and with the issue of the conservation area, you need to consider if there is harm to the conservation area, and as officers, again, we conclude that there is, but the public benefits that come with the renovation of the buildings, again, outweigh that harm. So that's the conclusion that we've come to on those planning issues, Chair. I do hope that helps Councillor Barry and other members, but of course, happily take more questions and try and provide advice as necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Righto.
We can hear you.
Okay. This is an amended application, and there were lots of things which were brought to the applicant's attention last time. Has he done anything? Did you advise him what he should have done? And has he actually done anything? Because as far as I can see, it's exactly the same thing, the same application that we had last time. And he's done nothing to justify any of the problems which we saw last time. Would you agree?
Chair, on that point, again, as you heard earlier on, the application has come back unaltered for that which you considered back in March. That is at the applicant's discretion. He is entitled to do that. You need to consider the application on its merits. The fact that he chose not to alter the scheme doesn't mean that it's necessarily unacceptable. Therefore, you need to consider the scheme on its merits and not the fact that you made certain points in March and the applicant has chosen not to amend the scheme. The fact that there wasn't a positive response to that wouldn't in itself be sufficient to resist the application. You need to consider it on its planning merits, as I've just discussed with Councillor Barry.
Thank you. Could I come back again, Chair?
Yes.
Right. In the NPPF, it's paragraph 143. It says about inappropriate development in the green belt. So it's got to have special circumstances, and I'm sorry, I can't see any special circumstances here. It's in a conservation area, and you know, you've got to look at it with the materials. I mean, this black metal cladding in an elevated position, I mean, it'll just stick out like a carbuncle. Would you agree on that? The visual impact is just not in keeping with the area.
Again, Chair, just to try and help Councillor Armitage, I don't think officers have done that issue either, Chair. It's clearly set out in the report that, as Councillor Armitage mentions, the MPPF is clear, your own policies are clear, that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. That's the line that officers have taken in our report. Officers have just concluded that we believe there is very special circumstances for the reasons that we discussed and the benefits that the scheme would bring with it. Members need to go through that same thought process, and you need to judge whether you believe what's been put forward is a very special circumstances justifies granting permission for what is otherwise mostly inappropriate development. Getting back to what Councillor Foster said earlier on, officers to Chair have discussed in our report the issue about the location of the new houses. Yes, they will be on an elevated part of the site overlooking the valley. Officers conclude that there would be a visual impact. So certainly we're not seeking to say that there aren't those impacts. What we are saying, in our opinion, is that there are very special circumstances. Members need to consider whether you agree with officers in this case or whether you don't, but you do need to go through that same thought process. Greenbelt, inappropriate or not development. If it is inappropriate, are there very special circumstances? So the thought process is the same, Chair. Members may come to a different conclusion. That is a perfectly reasonable planning judgment to take, providing you can evidence it and you have reason to do so, but you need to go through that same process.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. I'm happy to come back at a later time on the traffic issue, which is what we were covering earlier, so I can ask that afterwards. But firstly, I'd like to concentrate on this same issue which Adrian's kindly explained 2 or 3 times now. And when we look at the conclusions on page 30, it does explain what Adrian's speaking about. And it says, given the importance of the historic farm group, the less than substantial harm caused by the massing and scale of the new buildings is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits arising by way of saving this important historic farm group and securing an optimal viable use. This understand, and it's clear. So we understand that this the 5 new buildings were detrimental, but officers have weighed this against the public benefits arising by saving this important historic farm group. So when you look at how this will affect residents, how it will affect the overall look of the Greenbelt and what our countryside will look like, officers, what they've done is they've considered these 4 new buildings and considered that a price worth paying for the restoration and this saving this historic farm group. Now, I've heard, bear with me a second, I've heard this, and these are the exceptional circumstances. What I'd like a proper definition before I decide in my mind which way is the right way to go on this issue. I'd like a proper definition, a proper explanation by Adrian or any other officer, what exactly and how much weight we can put to these public benefits. So it's accepted that there are public benefits in preserving this historic farm group, but how great are they? And that is what I'd like to explore, that other side of the scale. Thank you.
That is the nub of the judgment, Chair, that members are being asked to make this afternoon. I can't, unfortunately, tell members how much weight to place on those benefits as outlined to officers. I am of the view that there aren't any other public benefits other than the retention and renovation of an historic group of farm buildings within a conservation area. That is the judgment that the decision maker, i.e. planning committee this afternoon, need to consider, Chair. If this were left to an officer delegated decision, officers would conclude that those public benefits in terms of the renovation and restoration of those buildings in a group would outweigh the other issues. And the same goes, as Councillor Foster's mentioned in speaking this afternoon, about the greenbelt issues. And it's the self-same benefits that officers believe outweigh the harm to the greenbelt and the less than substantial harm to the conservation area. But I can't, unfortunately, give a definition of what public benefits may or may not be for members to consider, nor indeed how much weight you should put on any particular issue for members. All I can tell you is officers have given them significant weight in this instance, but it is for you as the decision maker, as planning committee, to place appropriate weight on them and weigh them therefore in the planning balance.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for that. If you can just come back on that issue, I don't have any public benefits yet. Now, I understand I have to weigh them. I don't have to be told that again. I'm not being rude, but I don't have to be told that. I know how to weigh them, but I need to know what the public benefits are. We can't just say there's public benefits. I don't need a restating of what's written. I need to know what public benefits are to know how much weight to put on them. Thank you.
The public benefits, Chair, are the restoration and renovation of historic buildings within the conservation area.
I'm sorry, that's still not public benefits. It's just a statement.
Chair, I'll try and help further, but officers consider that the benefits to the it's a public interest benefit to preserve, retain, and renovate buildings within the conservation area in this context. That is the benefit to the wider public that officers have weighed in this instance.
Richard Purcell?
Can I just add, Chair?
You're frozen, Richard.
Thank you. Can I just add that I hear what Councillor Foster is saying, and also hear what Adrian is advising. I don't think officers can say any more about the aspects of community or public benefits. If members have a different view on that, they're perfectly entitled to take that view and put that into the balance of the decision making. You know, I don't think we've got anything more that we can really add to what Adrian has already said.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster, you came back, you had two parts of the question? Regarding highways?
It was a separate question, but it came from earlier, Chair. With your permission, it's about, it's a question to Adrian about the County Council's comments. Are you able to take that question?
Yes, Chair, I'll seek help if I can, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciated. We know there's accepted concerns about the visibility around the access road. And my own view of this so far is that the increase in traffic would have a cumulative negative impact on the area. There's also safety concerns regarding the junction, Carpenters Lane and Millthorpe Lane. But perhaps I'd like some exact comments on what Derbyshire County Council have said. They raised issues, as Adrian said earlier, about concerns relating to the proposed access and also the parking arrangements. Now, we know in here, I've read in the papers that they've been commented on by district officers. So the district officers have made comments on what the highway engineers at Derbyshire County Council have said. What I'd like to know is, have they put any conditions or introduced any control measures, or have they brought anything into play that would affect the comments or the issues raised by the highway engineers in relating to the proposed access and parking arrangements? So what have our officers got to say regarding their comments? I hope that's clear.
Chair, I'll come back, hopefully help Councillor Foster on those points, and I'm sure Colin will come in if I've got this wrong, but the Highway Authority have not raised any issue with regards to the access onto the primary highway network. So the photographs that we saw earlier of the actual access onto the primary highway network, they've not raised any issues with. What they did raise concerns about is the width of the access track inside the site, which is naturally constrained by the wall and the other buildings. And what the Highway Authority was saying is they would want that at 5 metres width, which if they did that would have a detrimental impact on a number of the historic buildings, which part of the reason for the application is to retain and renovate those. They also raised concern about the parking on site. And as I mentioned earlier, that is below the levels and the standards that you would normally look to achieve on a site such as this. The view that officers have taken on that, Chair, is that they are on-site issues and they don't affect the wider highway network or wider highway safety outside the site. And so the only impact of them will be on those who choose to live on the site. And as far as officers are concerned, that would be something that would be managed by those who live on the site. And because of the distance from the site entrance to the houses, would not, in my view, be something that would spill out onto the highway network and affect others in the vicinity of the site. So in weighing that, officers have taken the view that there isn't an adverse impact on, an unacceptable impact on highway safety, and that the residual cumulative impacts, which I discussed earlier on in terms of traffic movement, would not impact on the road network at a severe level. That's our view, Chair. So we've taken the views of the Highway Authority, looked at them, and taken the view that they are very localised, if at all, and cannot be said to have an unacceptable impact on highway safety or have a residual cumulative impact that would be severe. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, any further questions?
Okay,
thank you. Oh, Councillor Armitage?
Yes, this application is exactly, as I've said before, exactly the same. As far as I'm concerned, it's inappropriate development in the green belt. And if we look at paragraph 143 of the MPPF, there are no, as far as I can see, special circumstances at all. It's in a conservation area, and there'll be a negative impact on the landscape. There are problems with the foot, the road safety aspect, not enough parking spaces, and visibility problems. But as far as the highway concerned, they seem to think it's okay. But we've had this argument with highways before. So, but in conclusion, I move that we should go get officer's recommendation, and we should turn this application down.
I'd like to second that.
If you just, we haven't got to that stage yet. Councillor Hancock, did you want to say anything?
Councillor Hancock's left the room, Chair.
Okay, fine. So if there's no further, Councillor Barry's got one further question before we move the motion.
It's just a clarification, Adrian. We're talking about the barns being repaired. I take it those barns aren't listed in any way, shape or form. Is that?
That's correct, Chair. Yes, and if I may, just before members take the vote, my suggestion, Chair, and I note the motion that's been moved by Councillor Armitage, Chair. Just if I can be clear, first of all, on the reasons. I think Councillor Armitage is saying that it's unacceptable development in the green belt, and there are no sufficiently very special circumstances outweighing the harm to the green belt. He's also saying, I believe, that the development fails to protect and respect the character and appearance of the area for reasons such as materials, scale, massing, and location of the new dwellings. And finally, Chair, and I think I'm correct in this, Councillor Armitage is also saying that for those same reasons, the impact of the development is unacceptable in the conservation area. What I'm not hearing, though, Chair, is that Councillor Armitage is wanting to refuse the application on the basis of highway issues, and I would advise that is the correct approach if members do intend to go down the path of refusing the application. Just finally, Chair, and to try and assist members, if it's okay with yourself and Councillor Barry, if that motion is passed, I suggest that the final wording of the reasons for refusal would be delegated to officers in consultation with yourself and Councillor Barry.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Mark Foster?
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. Could I add to, with the permission of Councillor Armitage, can we make sure that we include the traffic issue? So the traffic issue is included in this, as Adrian's just said, but also 8.35 on page 30, where it says the new buildings outweighed by the public benefits. Can we have that part put in, please? Public benefits, in my view, do not outweigh. Now, with the permission of Councillor Armitage, if you have a look at that, can we make sure that the public benefits do not outweigh the harm caused by the massing scale of the new buildings? So is that clear what I've said? Thank you.
Could I?
That's a second motion.
Could I come in again, just on the question of highways? If it were to go to appeal, the fact that the highways people have come out in favour of the application, I think it will be unsafe to use the highways and the road safety aspect as a reason. And I think Adrian could advise on that.
I accept that from Councillor Armitage.
Okay.
Just so I can be clear, Chair, just the point that Councillor Foster made, in terms of both the a green belt reason and a conservation area reason, it would be my intention, Chair, to add in the issue that any public benefits or very special circumstances in case of green belt don't outweigh the harm that's caused. But just again, so we can be absolutely clear, Chair, I'm hearing that Councillor Armitage and Councillor Foster don't want the motion to include issues relating to highway safety or traffic. Just so I can be absolutely clear on that, Chair. There would be three reasons or wording associated with three reasons: greenbelt harm, harm to the wider landscape in terms of the scale massing materials that are proposed, and also harm to the conservation area, but just those issues and not any issues relating to highways, parking or traffic.
Yes, I agree with that.
Gentlemen, are you in agreement?
Yeah, I'll take William's advice on that.
Richard Purcell?
I'd like to second the motion, please.
Thank you, Jen. Adrian's covered all the additional points I had to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a motion before us to refuse this application. Does everyone understand the grounds for why we're going to, this motion's been put forward?
Yeah, perhaps it would just be useful if we just actually repeat that again, Chair. So the motion is to reject officer recommendations on the grounds of, I think Adrian's put it, in terms of the harm to the green belt, the materials issue and development within the conservation area, along the lines which have been discussed, with the final sort of wording actually to be agreed in consultation with yourself and Councillor Barry. Have I got that right there, Adrian?
That's right, Alan. I think hopefully Councillor Armitage and Councillor Foster will accept that by going through Councillor Rough and Councillor Barry, that we should secure the wishes of the committee should the vote go in that direction.
So the vote before us is to reject the application. It's been put forward by Councillor Armitage, seconded by Mark Foster. So we need to go to the full vote for the full membership. And I say we're doing this by roll call, Alan?
That's right, and it'll be handled by the facilitator, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to do a roll call vote. So if members could turn on their cameras at this point and just answer for, against, or abstain. And that's for rejecting the application.
Sorry.
Councillor William Armitage.
For.
Councillor Jane Barry. Councillor Jane Barry. Councillor Andrew Cooper.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster.
For.
Councillor Mo Potts. Councillor Mo Potts.
Mo, your mic's not on.
Sorry about that. For.
Councillor Alan Powell.
For.
Councillor Tracy Reader.
For.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Kathy Rouse.
For.
And Councillor Diana Roth.
For.
Chair, you'll notice that Councillor Carol Huckabee wasn't called in that roll call. I understood that Councillor Carol Huckabee was not voting on this item. Is that correct?
No, it isn't. I'm not voting on. No, I'm not voting on the next one, but I'm certainly voting on this one.
Right, so you're
No, you can't because you come.
It's for.
Councillor Huckabee, you actually spoke against the application, so on that basis, you would not normally be expected to vote on this.
Okay, yes.
So I think on that basis, Councillor Huckabee would not be part of the vote, Chair.
So on that basis, Chair, you've received 10 votes for rejection of the application.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I know it's taken a bit longer than we anticipated, but thank you for your patience.
Okay,
and
so
I
just
move
to
this section to be closed.
Okay, so just to be absolutely clear for those watching, Chair, that the motion has passed. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you all for the have taken part. Leaving. Members, are we going to have a comfort break before we move on to the next application?
Yes, please.
Say about 10 minutes, Chair.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
for the live feed to.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Do you want to go through a roll call again, or is it okay that we are standing as before?
I can just confirm, Chair, that in the meeting room we have Councillor William Armitage, Councillor Jane Barry, Andrew Cooper, Mark Foster, Mo Potts, Carol Huckabee, Alan Powell, Tracy Reeder, Jackie Ridgway, Kathy Rouse, and yourself, Chair, Diana Ruff.
Thank you.
The visitors are, as the previous meeting, the head of planning in the meeting room, as well as the planning manager, Adrian Kirkham, and the governance team to support the meeting.
Thank you. So the first item on, or the second item on the agenda, sorry, I've lost it already, is planning application, which is NED /20 00185, the Scout Hut at Holmesfield. Adrian Kirkham would like to take us through the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, just ahead of going through the presentation, just to refer members to the late comments report that was sent out yesterday, and also a brief introduction, Chair, just to explain that this application seeks the construction of a building to be used as a scout hut, although the supporting information does suggest that it would also be used for other purposes. It would measure approximately 19 metres by 14 metres with an overall height of 6.7 metres, comprising accommodation of a hall, lobby, kitchen, toilets, back room and storerooms with storage above. In addition, Chair, it will be constructed of stone with dark grey standing seam zinc roofing. It's also proposed, Chair, to create a car park to serve the building, and also the area around the building would be used to service the hut. As with the previous application, Chair, this site is located in the Greenbelt and also within but a different conservation area, the Holmesfield Conservation Area in this case. But also in this instance, the proposed building is within the setting of the Grade 2 listed church of St Swithun's, and we'll see some photographs of that in a second. In this instance, Chair, officers conclude that the building is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and fails to fulfil any of the exceptions to that general policy position, although the applicant does in the submitted statements allude to a different view, alluding that it's used to support outdoor sport. However, I say officers take a different view, Chair, concluding it's inappropriate development. Officers also conclude, Chair, that due to the building's size and location, it would have significant visual harm on the openness of the Greenbelt. Whilst the applicant seeks to set out that there are very special circumstances justifying approval of this scheme and exception to those Greenbelt restrictions, officers conclude that in this case, they aren't sufficient to offset the harm that would be caused to the Greenbelt. Additionally, Chair, just to remind members that the committee need to pay special regard to the site's location within the conservation area, but also in this case to the setting of St Swithun's Church. Officers conclude, Chair, that the introduction of this functional building to the site would fail to preserve the conservation area or the setting of the listed church. Just on technical issues, Chair, officers don't believe there are any technical or amenity issues that would justify on their own refusing the application. In conclusion, Chair, officers don't consider there are very special circumstances to justify this development in the Greenbelt, and that it would fail to protect the valued heritage assets as I've outlined. Accordingly, officers recommend that the application is refused. Just on one point, if I may, Chair, further to the virtual site visit we undertook yesterday, where Councillor Barry and I discussed the location of St Swithun's Church, I did incorrectly say yesterday, Chair, that the church was located within the settlement limits of Holmesfield. It's not, Chair, it's outside those limits and is within the Greenbelt. Just if Nikki's able to help me with the presentation, Chair, I'll just go through the slides that have been prepared. Just go through to the next one, Nikki, please. The application site, Chair, is the site. It's roughly an N shape, and you can. Sorry, Chair.
We can't see the slides on our screen.
Does that go for all members, Chair?
I'm not sure. We're in the chamber, so
I can see remotely.
I can see them.
Okay. Yeah, we can.
I can see them.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop screen sharing just for a moment, just to resolve that for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair, just to confirm that the slides are going on the live feed, so there must be something that's not working currently in the chamber. We'll organise some on-site support for you. If I try and screen share now, could you confirm that you can see?
No.
It should be active in a moment. Is that better, Chair?
No, all we've got is faces. Do you just want to talk us through it? I mean, Councillor Barry and I have seen it, so unless there's anything different to that, we're quite happy for you to just talk us through it, Adrian.
Okay, I'll carry on, Chair, if you're happy with that, and Nikki's happy with that, Chair. The other members, Chair, can see on the screen roughly an N shape in the middle of their slide, which identifies the application site. On the right-hand bottom line of that N, there is a slightly lighter shade. That's the existing church car park, Chair. And just above there, before the end of the cemetery, where the field widens out, that would be the area where the car park would be formed. But also there, Chair, just as the field would open out, that is where the new building is proposed. So the building isn't proposed next door to the existing car park, but beyond there, some distance beyond. And the other fields, Chair, are the ones that identified in the application site to be used in association with the Scout Hut. Thank you, Nikki. And this shows that in more detail, Chair. The site is showing, the screen is showing the application site. So there's the existing church car park, then an area that's identified as Scout car park, and then the rectangular blob is the location of the building itself, and field 1 and 2 within the application site. And as I say, the site is within the conservation area, and the C-shaped building just to the bottom right of that leg of the N is St Swithin's Church. Thanks, Nikki. In more detail, Chair, the building is now being shown on the screen. It's the rectangular shape at the head of the, it's the top third of the slide, and St Swithin's Church in this instance is just to the bottom right of that slide. So the site within the conservation area, St Swithin's Church, a Grade 2 listed building. Thanks, Nikki. Just some details of the structure, Chair. In this instance, as with the previous application, the building would be stone and modular roofing. So the roofing would be of, as I mentioned in the opening, it would be the sheeting that is identified as, I think it's defined as standing seam. So it's a modular roof with some elements that are raised above that, so creating some seams within it. Thanks, Nikki. I'm just going to go on to the other two elevations now. So that's, just go back. Well, yeah, briefly, Nikki, thank you. The elevation at the top is the east elevation, which would overlook the fields to the east and the northeast. North elevation clearly facing north is blank. If you just go on to the photographs, Nikki, please. The first one, that shows the existing access into the church car park. So the existing car park there, and the site itself is beyond the hedge that you can see in the middle distance. This slide identifies the wall on the right-hand side is the kickback that I've mentioned, where the field widens out. So where the photographer is part of the proposed car park. And then if you just go to the next one, Nikki, the photographer pans round, so you can just see that kickback there. So the area in the foreground is where the car park would be, and the area where that crease in the wall opens out, that's where the building would be located. And beyond, you can just see, I think it's bungalow farm, which is the building in the distance just beyond the application site boundary. And if you pan around, Nikki, we should see more of the western boundary. And then if you pan around again, please. Looking back, the area that's in the foreground would be the car park. So the photographer is now taking the picture from the location of the proposed building. The foreground would be the car park, and then you can just see the blue car in the middle of the slide. That's a car parked in the existing car park. And then you can make out now the St Swithin's Church Tower, hence the officer conclusion that the building would have an impact on the setting of that listed building. Thanks, Nikki. Next one. I think they're just wider shots. This now looks back towards the application site. So that wall on the left-hand side, that returns now. That's the crease I've kept on referring to. So the building would be on the middle right of this shot. So roughly where you can see that house, which is beyond the site and across the lane, but the building would be in that location, but on the field in the foreground. So the building from where the photographer is would actually take over the view of that building and remove it from shots. The building would be there, car park on the left. And just the final one, please. Thank you. That's the same shot, but that shows through that western boundary across the lane. That's one of the dwellings that's located across the site. It's on the, and in the papers, it's referred to as Holmesfield Hall Cottage. That's the presentation concluded, Chair. Happy to take questions later.
Thank you. Okay, if we move on to the first speaker, and I've got it down as Nick Wheat, the Chair of the Parish Council.
Well, it's Barry Wheat, actually. I'm Chairman of Holmesfield Parish Council.
You? You've got 3 minutes, Mr. Wheat.
Thank you. As you appreciate, I'm speaking on behalf of the Parish Council, for which I've been chairman for the last 40 years. Now, as a former Cub and King Scout myself, and like so many parishioners who have supported this application, including our local district councillor Carol Huckabee and our MP Lee Rowley, all know of the benefits from being a member of the 3rd Holmesfield Scouts, which was formed by the vicar of our church in 1957 and who became the first Scout leader. Holmesfield has a small primary school, Penny Acres, which is very important, serving our local young people. And to complement this, it would be ideal to welcome back to our village the Scout group. The Scout group continued to thrive with over 110 members and a current waiting list. In 2008, their accommodation was sold by the village church to fund their new modern church hall. In order to retain the Scout group, they were forced to seek a temporary move out of the village and share with 5 other Scout groups at Rakes Lane in Dromfield, some 2.5 miles outside our village. These premises have a limited lifespan with no disabled access or toilets. All internal and external equipment is currently housed in metal containers. The Parish Council have for the last 12 years been looking for a suitable site to build a new Scout hut in the village, which can enjoy an adjacent field for outdoor sport and recreation, which in today's world is of great importance. You can understand how excited the Parish Council were to agree a lease to the Scout group on the proposed site in the centre of the village. The site is accessible by foot from the adjacent housing estate and enjoys use of the existing village hall and church car parking. The site is also adjacent to the existing electric, gas and drainage services, and of course close to the church for the traditional Scout and Guide parades. The building is sited well away from the historic buildings, and a detailed professional survey and report by Anderson Tree Care has established that the existing mature hedge and trees are retained clear of any root protection to give an established screening to the proposed building. It is noted that consent has been recently granted on appeal for the 30 seconds remain for 3 new dwellings accessed from Park Avenue. If we in Holmesfield can again provide a Scout hut and recreational field that will allow children to lead active community-spirited, happy lives filled with fun, friendship and adventure, this surely will be a positive influence and something we must strive to achieve. In light of the present push for children to be engaged in positive pursuits and the consequence of the closing of youth clubs, we respectfully request
That's 3 minutes, Chair.
where the village community will meet with government objectives for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Wheat? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Foster here. Question for Councillor Wheat. Is there, forgive my ignorance on this, is there currently a Holmesfield Scout crew? If there is, how many members does it have? Where does it currently meet? Is it the Reeks Lane?
I'm confirming there are 110 current members and they are currently housed at Rakes Lane in Dromfield.
Right, yeah. Right. So that's specifically a Holmesfield Scout group that meets at Reeks Lane, yeah.
Correct.
And you said there's no disabled access there. I know nearer there is Gorsey Brig Scout group, and that does have disabled.
I wouldn't know that.
Sorry, Chair. Just on that same point, this is the Holmesfield Scout group. It's got that many members. Are all these members, are they all local children to Holmesfield?
The answer is the majority are local people, and there may well be some from adjacent villages like Barlow and Millthorpe.
Thank you.
Councillor Potts?
Oh, thank you. Councillor Wheat, can I just ask you, please, if you could put some distance? I found it very difficult to get a judge on that from the photographs we've seen. The distance between the church and the proposed site, please.
It's quite a long distance, actually. In terms of meterage, I'd say it was something like 20 meters or even beyond that from the back of the church. And don't forget, of course, the church has a new modern extension of a church hall before we get to our site.
Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Powell?
Yes, one of the objectors has said that there is already adequate accommodation in the village. I assume he's meaning the parish church hall and also the village hall. Presumably the Scouts can't use those or are not allowed to use them.
I can explain that very simply. The village hall is fully occupied almost permanently, and there is no storage, which is an important aspect of all Scout accommodation. There's so much equipment like tents and outdoor activity playing equipment that requires housing. So even if they could use either the church hall or the village hall, there would be simply nowhere to store any equipment at all. And also, of course, remember the important thing, ball games are obviously played quite a bit among Scouts, guides, etc. And both those buildings are fully glazed from ceiling to floor. And they obviously would be dangerous in breaking.
Councillor Huckabee?
Sounds good if you can hear you.
Yes, can I speak now?
Yes.
Right. I have been involved in the Scout movement for many years, since my own son was a Scout cub at 6 years old.
Sorry, Councillor Huckabee, is this a question at this point, or are you making a statement?
No. It's a statement.
No, we just need
as a parish district councillor, I was able.
We need a question or clarification, not a statement.
Right. The Scout headquarters was situated in the local village hall, church hall at the time. Mr. Wheat has already told you that unfortunately the church put the chapel up for sale and consequently the Scouts and the Cubs had to move to Dronfield Woodhouse, 2.5 miles away. Now, we are so lucky we have a benefactor in our village who is prepared to act as guarantor for a new build for the new Scout hut. The Scouts and Cubs belong to the village. When they had to move out, we really missed them, particularly in the church. And I am happy to support this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Wheat, can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
When the extension was put on in the church hall, was it not a consideration for the Scouts to use it then?
No, none at all.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. A question for Councillor Wheat. There's 110 members. They currently still meet, and they meet in Dronfield at a designated Scout hut, which is leased from the town council, from what I understand. If you weren't granted, if the Scouts weren't granted, the group wasn't granted permission for the purchasing, the building of this on this land, what would happen to the Scout group? Would they continue to meet in Dronfield, or would they have to be disbanded? Are they being forced out of Dronfield or anything like that? Is there?
I think they wouldn't have any alternative to stay where they are. But the point is that it's important that we get them back in the village where they belong, where they were first formed. We've got to attract for people in the village.
And further to that, Councillor, what's the population of Holmesfield? I'm just trying to narrow down where these 110 children come from. What I'm thinking is, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm trying to think where these children live, roughly, where they're travelling to, and where the parents are parking. So that's what I'm trying to think about. I'm trying to look at those considerations. So, what's the population of Holmesfield?
Well, there's about 750 houses throughout the parish. It's a massive parish, of course, as you probably appreciate. What was the other question? Sorry. You wanted to know the size of the village.
Yeah, that's answered it really. Now I know how big it is. We've got an idea how many children there are, and
right.
You know, and where they're coming from and where they're going to. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Majority, of course, come from the housing estate adjacent.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Wheat. Now we can hear from Planning Officer.
Excuse me, Chair. Mr. Sweeney was down to speak as well.
I haven't got him on my list.
As an objector, as I understand.
Okay. Speak to Mr. Sweeney then, please.
Is Mr. Sweeney here?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Hello,
yes.
Sweeney.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
You can all hear me. Can you? Right. I'm basically representing the residents of Vicarage Close, which adjoins the back end of the field 2, as it was. So this is my statement. Noise from 110 children will make a lot of noise. It's only 2 nights a week. The application mentioned it could be used for other groups. There's an ever-growing waiting list of applicants to join Scouts at Reach Lane. Excuse me, I'm very nervous. Would this mean more noise? And are all these applicants from the Holmesfield area? The gardens on Vicarage Close are at best 3 to 4 metres long. And as the field is part of the proposal, we hear parties from Shepley Hall, dogs barking in the Hunt Kennel, music from the pubs, and the pealing of the church bells, which are all further away than the Scout hut. It's not reasonable to understand to think that there will be a lot of noise from the Scouts themselves. Most of the households are retired and elderly. And as their bedrooms back onto the fields, will they have to wait for the children to finish before they can go to sleep? The disturbance, there's an awful lot of wildlife in the field as well. There's regular nightly visitors of foxes, badgers, barn owls, and the occasional deer. During the day, there's assorted birds such as nuthatches, kestrels, odd peregrine falcon, and buzzards. When the field was mowed regularly, we had the odd nesting lapwing. Animal tracks crisscross the field, as most of them being well-established badger tracks. There will be a loss of privacy if the field overlooks gardens and rear windows of the bungalows on Vicarage Close. During lockdown, we had more than the occasional dog walker wandering around the field, following the badger tracks, thinking they were footpaths. The gardens are not big, and sometimes when somebody wandered past, you would think they were in the back garden or at your back door. You can see straight into the houses, and it's not very pleasant, particularly if you're in advanced years. Homefield Scouts run an annual event called Go Bigmore, which has caused major problems to the residents of Vicarage Close. The parking had been that bad you've been unable to get off your drive, and if you were lucky to get out, you couldn't get back to your house. If you did say anything, you ran the risk of being abused. This was not the fault of the Scouts, but the participants. However, the lack of parking was. The new proposal allows no allowance for visiting groups or any events run from the building, but instead will continue to rely on the surrounding roads, the car parks, and car
30
parks.
seconds remain.
In summing up, I'd like to say this is the second time the application has crossed the planner's desk with no major amendments since moving from Vicarage Close to Park Avenue. The proposed development is still the same. It's in a conservation area. It's adjacent to Grade 2 listed buildings and is still situated in Greenbelt land. The houses further down Park Avenue are on previously used for building. And whether they're a modern design or not bears no relevance on particulars, as they are surrounded by trees and hedgerows. Sorry, I can't.
That's fine. That's fine. Are there any questions for Mr. Sweeney? No? Thank you very much. We move on to the agent, Roland Bolton.
Hello there. Can you hear me and see me?
Thank you, Mr. Bolton, and thank you for your patience.
No worries at all.
If you'd like to start, you have 3 minutes.
Yes. This proposal is for the third Holmesfield Scout Group, which was originally based in the Church Hall until it was sold until 2008. The new Church Hall between the church and the application site is unsuitable because it has no outside area for scouting activities, has no storage space, is not suitable for indoor scouting activities in times of inclement weather. Most importantly, it is not available any evening during the week. As you've heard, presently, the Scout Group share accommodation in Drumfield, and this is unsatisfactory for all the reasons set out in the Scoutmaster's letter, which is in Appendix 2 of our planning statement, which you will have read. The benefits of the proposal, therefore, are that it will enable the well-established and popular Scout Group to return to the community it serves. It will provide a safe environment for local children, has direct access to a large area for outdoor activities, has internal storage space for outdoor equipment, it has access to washrooms for outdoor activities, and has safe access to drop off and pick up compared to the present position. The officers have recommended refusal partly based on the conclusion that the hut is primarily for indoor recreation and hence inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. This is a planning judgment, and if your experience like mine is that scout huts are necessary to facilitate outdoor recreation, then the proposal would not be an appropriate development. The officer's conclusions actually runs contrary to the reasons given by the Scout Group for locating back into the village, which include access to the larger outdoor area, the ability to store outdoor equipment, and access to washrooms from outdoors. A clubhouse that supports and facilitates outdoor recreation is not an appropriate development in the Greenbelt. Turning to special circumstances, there are 17 letters of support that have been submitted from local MP district councillors, as well as existing and past parish councillors. You've heard how the parish council have actively pushed for the South Group to submit the application and the importance they have for the parish. In the 17 letters of support, the Scout Group is described as being a hugely important part of the local community and vitally important to the development of local children. Turning to the impact on heritage, the heritage statement submitted includes that there will be no significant harm to St Withn's Church or the conservation area, because the key elevation of the church,
30 seconds remain.
The application site is to the north. The application is heavily screened, and the use of stone and dark grey pitch roof is suitable for the materials of the conservation area. It is for you to determine whether the proposal is necessary to start outdoor recreation. If it is, then I would suggest that points in favour of it being granted. If not, you should have the balance between the limited adverse impact of the proposal and the obvious benefits. This balance was decided in favour of a similar case in Wakefield, which unfortunately had to go to appeal for approval. I respectfully ask that the committee approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Are there any questions for Mr. Bolton? No, thank you.
Councillor Tracy Reed is indicating she would like to speak, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Reader.
Yes, Chair, I just want to ask the gentleman, obviously this is a greenfield site. You know, have you considered other sites around the area which are brownfield and suitable for building on? Have you looked at other places?
My understanding is that the Scout Group and the Parish Council have thought, since they moved out in 2008, to try and find a suitable site within the village, and they've been unable to do so. That's understandable, given that there are limited, I would say, brownfield sites within the village, and also, of course, being a Scout Group, they don't have the ability, if you like, to access the funds to purchase land which would otherwise be suitable for commercial development. And therefore, the fact that they have been given the opportunity, if you like, to acquire this land and have a building put on it from a benefactor is really the opportunity for them to come back to the village.
Are there any further questions, Councillor Foster?
Right, thank you, Chair. I've heard a few times about come back to the village from different speakers. When were the Scouts last in the village before they went to Cromfield?
The younger Scouts went immediately in 2008 when their church hall, well, not their church hall, but when the church hall was sold. The older Scouts did start trying to use a barn, but that barn had no toilet facilities and really wasn't suitable, and they left, and the older Scouts left a couple of years later. I'm not quite sure of the date. I know Mr. Wheat will be. And they've been looking to come back ever since. So it's over a decade they've been seeking to come back to the village.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Bolton. I'd like to ask the Planning Manager, Adrian Kirkham, to take us through any clarification points. Oh, sorry, I've got someone here. Councillor Barry.
It's a question for Adrian on clarification. When the extension was built to the church and the plan application came in, my understanding was that one of the reasons for wanting this extension was to house the Scouts. Now, Mr. Wheat has said that that's not the case. Can you clarify whether it was when we approved the application for the extension to the church?
Certainly, Chair, in terms of the justification that accompanied that application back in 2006, one of the specifics that was set out in the supporting statement is that the extension to the church to form the new church hall would actually accommodate the Scout group that I'll just quote you from it, Chair, if I can find it here. Just had it a moment ago now. I've managed to lose it. One of the justifications for that extension to the church hall in that case, Chair, was to accommodate various other uses. Oh yes, I found it now. In addition to usage of the church hall on Sundays, it envisaged that the new building would provide facilities for thriving and inclusive Beaver Club and Scout groups who use the existing church hall. The after-school club run by the church on Mondays are currently catering for about 15 children. So as part of that justification, Chair, it was suggested that the Beaver Club and Scout groups would use that extension. Ultimately, Chair, as I say on a number of occasions, you need to judge this application on its merits, but certainly in that case, that was one of the reasons behind the extension to the church to form the new church hall that was given. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
It does, thanks, Adrian. I'm just trying to weigh up, you know, because the church is already in Greenbelt, and if we start to put another piece of property in there, that we are going to be eroding that Greenbelt area very rapidly. So thank you for the clarification.
Any further questions for Adrian? No, thank you. Oh, Councillor Reader?
Yes, I just want to come back again. I know I don't. The last application doesn't bear any relevance to this application, but again, we're talking about green belt. So again, I just want to draw on a little bit of the questioning that Councillor Foster was making in the last application to this application in terms of public benefit. So on page 44, it does talk about in the report the instance of public benefits and weighing out that in it, and you know, the officers have come to the conclusion that the public benefits don't outweigh the harm to the area. So I just want to draw on what Councillor Foster was saying previously, is that we've got to sort of look at this as a greenfield site, and nobody would want the Scouts to have a place more than myself, you know, working in children's services. You know, I would totally want them to have a place to go, but obviously we're considering planning matters in this case. So in terms of that, again, I don't know if you can answer this, Adrian, as you've said previously, but when you talk about benefits, what do you mean by that? I don't know if you can answer that. I'm sorry.
Well, as I mentioned to Councillor Foster earlier on, I can't tell you as the decision maker, i.e. planning committee, I can't tell you how much weight to place on the benefits that are being put forward, and therefore the very special circumstances. What I will say, Chair, in this instance is that officers are firmly of the view that it is inappropriate development, being a new development, new build development in the Greenbelt. And you heard Mr. Bolton earlier on refer to an appeal decision of a Scout facility in Wakefield. Well, in that instance, the inspector in that instance didn't conclude that the facility was to support outdoor sport, and he took that. I think it was a he. I apologise if it wasn't, but I think it was he concluded that because of the nature of the accommodation that was proposed and the scale of the accommodation proposed. And I think that runs over into this application too, in the scale and the nature of the accommodation that's proposed. I don't think it's a building that you would normally say is, say, a changing facility for a football field. It's more than that, and would provide indoor space as well. Just in terms of the harm, first of all, to the Greenbelt, officers in this instance have taken the view that that we have, because in this instance, and it wasn't our conclusion on the other application, but as Councillor Reid has referred to that, Chair, I think it's useful to try and just make a distinction between the two. In this instance, officers take the view that the harm to the Greenbelt in this case is greater because of the distance that the building is from other built development in and around it. So it will be a new building in the Greenbelt, but disassociated from other buildings. And again, that is a distinction that sets it aside from the Wakefield case that Mr. Bolton took, where the inspector weighed those things about how the new structure, albeit being in Greenbelt, related to other buildings. And also in that case, it occupied a dip in the land, whereas this, although the photographs aren't fantastically depictive of this, it does sit on the head of as the field then falls away to the bungalow that we saw earlier on. So in an officer view, in this case, the harm to the Greenbelt is in an officer view amplified. And taking that into account, We don't believe that the benefit of the Scout facility, which we accept members will need to weigh, but we don't believe, because of the harm to the greenbelt, because of those circumstances, the distance from other built form, its prominence and its isolation, comparatively speaking, officers have concluded that those other circumstances put forward don't outweigh those considerations in this case. Finally, I appreciate Councillor Reid didn't mention this, Chair, would hope she won't mind me just mentioning it. Members also need to consider the location of the site within the conservation area, and you've discussed materials as well. Materials are very similar to those that were proposed for the new build housing just down the way. So again, that needs to be a consideration for you, but also, and Mr. Bolton did mention this too, the impact on the setting of the listed building needs to be taken into account. And I think the photographs do show that there is some visual interaction between the two. So you do need to take special regard of that too, and how the building would impact on the way that that heritage asset is enjoyed in some form from the site. And there are footpaths and plenty of public activity in the area. Again, as always, Chair, I hope that's helped Councillor Reid.
Thank you.
Provide further clarification if needed.
Okay. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Question for Adrian. I understand the public benefit, and I know as councillors here and members here, we have to weigh that public benefit against possible harm to the green belt. But in this case, we can actually define that public benefit. I think all of us here, like we've heard the people speak from Holmesfield, some of the people, we can actually define the actual public benefit. It's quite easy to, because the Scouts that will be benefiting. That's one point. The other point, and it's a question, it says in 7.4 on page 43, the officers, the view of officers is that the building would be primarily for indoor recreation. So specifically this, if it was for outdoor recreation, would that make a difference in the recommendations or the views of officers? So the recommendations or the views of officers if it were outdoors. Thank you.
Can I come in on this one? Ultimately, I would say not, because the policy consideration isn't merely that it would be solely for outdoor recreation or principally for outdoor recreation, but it also has to preserve the openness of the green belt. So we would say that a building of this scale on an otherwise undeveloped parcel of land would undoubtedly have an impact on the openness of the green belt, and therefore would fail that policy requirement, notwithstanding whether it would be for outdoor sport or principally for indoor recreation, as we've concluded. And as Adrian alluded to previously, an inspector on the Wakefield appeal decision also suggested that a Scout hut in that instance wouldn't be primarily for outdoor sport and recreation.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Deathly silence. Thank you, Adrian. Right, we move on to the last part of this. Does anyone want to put a motion forward?
Chair, can I move officer's recommendation?
A seconder? I'd like to second that. Those in favour? Councillor Reader? Yeah.
I was going to second it, Chair, but you've done it, I think.
Okay. Nikki?
Sorry, Chair, are we intending to do this through a roll call?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now Barry has put the motion forward to reject the application.
No. To go with officer's recommendation.
To go with officer's recommendation, sorry. I've seconded it, and now we're going to do a roll call.
Chair, so we're going to move to the vote. I'll be doing it by roll call, so I'll ask each member's name in turn if you could indicate for, against, or abstention. If members could turn on their cameras if they have them off currently. Councillor William Armitage.
For.
Councillor Jane Barry.
For.
Councillor Andrew Cooper.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster.
For.
Councillor Carol Huckabee.
Abstain. Abstain.
Councillor Mo Potts.
For.
Councillor Alan Powell.
For.
Councillor Tracy Reader. Councillor Tracy Reader.
For, Chair.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Kathy Rouse. Councillor Kathy Rouse.
Yeah, 4.
And finally, Chair, yourself, Councillor Diana Ruff.
4.
Okay, that is 10 votes for and 1 abstention, Chair. Therefore, it's carried.
Thank you very much.
The motion to approve officer recommendations has been carried, Chair, just for clarity.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. The planning appeals, lodged and determined.
If I may, Chair, just very briefly, I'd like to make a couple of points on this. I won't detain members any longer. I know it's been a long afternoon already, so just bear with me a second. First of all, Chair, members will note there's been a whole number of appeals lodged since March, and that's partly because we've not reported any since March, so that is reflective of that. But also just to ask members to note the amount of appeals that we have, and therefore it does have an impact on how we deal with those and we resource them. So just to ask members to note that, Chair. And then the other point I just wanted to ask members to note in the appeals allowed, the appeal allowed on page 52, at the top of page 52, relates to an application at Green Lane at Dronfield. And in that instance, an award of costs has been made against the council. And I just wanted to use that, Chair, to ask members to note that. And in his decision on the costs award, the inspector set out that he didn't feel that the council had been able to make any bring forward any substantive technical evidence in support of the reason to refuse the application, which was primarily on highway grounds, members may remember. So I just wanted to use that, Chair, if I may, to reiterate that members are clearly able to make whichever decision they believe on planning grounds is appropriate in any given circumstance. But when that is tested on appeal, unless we can bring forward evidence to support that, we are, as a council, at risk of having costs awarded against us, as in this case. So it's just, Chair, to ask members to note that, and where we're discussing particularly technical issues, to remember that in advising members on those points, when we ask for evidence to support them that can then be tested and stand up at appeal, we are seeking to protect the council's position, and we're not merely seeking to subvert the wishes of members that may be properly considered, Chair. So just wanted to ask members to note that and seek to help us in advising you as officers going forwards on those technical issues. Happy to take any questions, Chair, but that was the only point I wanted to make, and thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone got any questions for Adrian? Councillor Ridgway?
Yes, it's. I don't know if I can bring it up now. Do we have any other business? I just want to bring something up for Adrian. Basically, I think I said yesterday, Adrian, I really enjoyed the virtual viewing that we did yesterday, and it's really helped me today sitting here having the planning meeting. And I just wondered whether it would be something that we could send out to all people on the planning committee, even the substitutes, because I just feel that sometimes, like me, I work, on a Monday when people go out to do the site visits. Then I come into planning and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know what's going on here, because I only get a glimpse of the pictures that you put up. So I just wondered if it was something that the committee would be happy to for us to do, if the officers are okay with it.
Chair, I don't know whether Richard wants to come in. I'll say a few words and hopefully not contradict anything he was going to say. But first of all, I'm grateful for those comments, Councillor Ridgway, because what we did yesterday was a first up, and I'm pleased it worked out in a helpful way for members. I do think, as officer who was in the production and direction of those video clips, that we can learn something from it and just make them slightly less frantic. And in consultation with Nikki and Alan, we are looking at better ways of doing that, and hopefully adding a commentary. Just on the substantive point you make, Councillor Ridgway, I personally no problems in providing anything to members that helps you in your decision making. That's what we as officers are here to do. In your deliberations as a planning committee, we do seek to help you with all the information that you need. So I have no problems with that. It's just how we organise the timings of all those things, but they're just logistics. And personally, I have no problems with providing that as a standalone piece of information, perhaps with commentary, and or undertaking a virtual site meeting as we did for yesterday for those members who were able to attend. But anything we can do to help, and any feedback we had on yesterday's virtual site visit is helpful. I'm just grateful that members did find it useful, because I was a bit concerned that the video clips were a bit frantic, and that Mr. Spielberg perhaps wouldn't have wanted them being in general release.
If I just add to that, yeah, I agree with everything that Adrian has said there, and we are on a bit of a learning curve with how to do things virtually for everyone's benefit, not just planning committee members and substitutes, but also for the public as well. And you know, these suggestions are very welcome, and we will work on trying to make them work for you for the future. And I think that some of the debate that we had yesterday, for those that did attend on screen, was very helpful in trying to sort of understand some of the more difficult aspects of what the proposal was about. So yeah, so there's a lot of food for thought that we are actively working on to make life easier and more understandable for yourself and all participants in the committee. So yes, this is something you will hear more of later, I'm sure.
Thank you. Is that it from everybody? Well, thank you all for this afternoon. I think it went off very well for our first attempt, and I wish you all a good evening.
Bye-bye.